Okay, welcome to the public hearing for the inquiry into budget estimates 2021-2022. Before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present. I welcome Minister Melinda Pavey and accompanying officials to this hearing. Today, the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for the portfolio of water, property and housing. Before we commence, I would like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's proceedings are being broadcast live from the Parliament's website, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. All witnesses in budget estimates have a right to procedural fairness according to the procedural fairness resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Minister, I remind you and the officers accompanying you that you are free to pass notes and refer directly to your advisors seated at the table behind you. In terms of auditability of the hearing today, we have witnesses in person and via video conference. Can I ask committee members to clearly identify who questions are directed to, and could I ask everyone hearing remotely to please state their name when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they are not speaking? Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? All witnesses will be sworn prior to giving evidence. Minister Pavey, I remind you that you don't need to be sworn, as you've already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. For all other witnesses, I ask that you each in turn state your full name, position, title and agency, and swear either an oath or affirmation, and the words of both have been provided to you. I will start with going down the list that I have. Ms Fishburn.
Thank you. Kirsten Fishburn, Secretary, Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, and I will take the affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr Michael Wright.
Michael Wright, Group Deputy Secretary, Housing and Property, Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms Melanie Hawes, are you online?
She is.
She is.
There seems to be an IT issue in that room.
Yeah, they may be having technical issues, I think.
Okay, well,
That's Leon Walker there.
well, we'll throw to you, Mr Walker. We can hear you and see you, so let's roll with that.
So Leon Walker, Deputy Secretary of Property and Development, New South Wales. I'll take the affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Do we have a Miss Jen Hickey, or was she in that?
She's there.
She's there. Miss Hickey?
You're right. Jennifer Hickey, CEO, Cemeteries and Crematoria, New South Wales. I solemnly and sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms McLaren?
Alice McLaren, Executive Director, Business Performance, Value for General New South Wales. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr Michael Castle. Was he in that room as well?
He's in that double room there, yeah.
Okay. I might just throw to the double room. Are you able to hear us now?
No. No.
No. Okay. Well, while I have the committee secretary work out those technical difficulties, we might just throw to questions, and then if
Spiel you could read out.
Sorry,
Do you have a spiel you have to read out, or you already done that?
I've done that. Oh, sorry. Today's hearing will be conducted from 2 to 5:15 with the minister and departmental witnesses, with questions from the opposition crossbench members only, and if required, an additional 15 minutes is allocated at the end of the session for government questions. So we'll throw to there is no there's no break, as I'm understanding. We don't need a COVID-safe break to the
Is that right?
subject.
We have one in the morning session.
We still do.
Oh, we do?
Because we're going to change over officials too.
Yeah, it'll be 3:30 then, yeah, in line with the changeover.
For 15 minutes?
Yeah, for 15 minutes.
20, 30, 40, Friday afternoon, 50.
I will throw to the opposition and hopefully we can sort out the technical difficulties with our other witnesses.
Thank you. Welcome, Minister.
How are you, Mick?
Friday afternoon. So, Minister, first series of questions are around the 11th hour report into cemeteries, so that helps with where you direct the questions to.
Which was coming to this session.
The 11th hour report into the restructure of cemeteries, a recommendation was made to consolidate the Crown cemeteries into an entity known as One Crown. And Tim Scott, the report's author, says the following, and I quote, "The findings of this statutory review demonstrate significant financial value resides within the Crown sector cemetery entities if structured and managed in a prudent manner. Once the necessary regulatory framework has been clearly established and the assets structured in a manner to ensure financial sustainability, the government may wish to reconsider its role at that time." Minister, is that code for corporatising Crown cemeteries?
No.
So there's no...
I might also point out that David Harley was also involved in producing the 11th hour report.
This meeting is being recorded.
Sorry.
That was just the WebEx.
Okay. Sorry, that was David Harley?
Yep.
There was just a little bit of something else going on at the same time.
What's the reconsideration of the role then? Why does it say in the report that government may wish to reconsider its role? What kind of reconsideration might that be?
Well, that was for the authors of the report. Doesn't mean the government does what an authors of a report says.
But you announced in May that you were adopting this report. That was what you came out and said was going to be your policy. So.
And we're still working through many of the recommendations of that report. There are still live decisions before Cabinet, so I will not be able to go into full details of those considerations.
Is that going to be different from what you came out and announced in May?
I'm not at liberty to be able to say what government will decide, what Cabinet will decide. It's a decision that's before Cabinet at the moment.
But you made public statements in May, so people are wondering, where's that up to? The Minister, she's come out in May, she said this is what's going to happen. Must have been pretty embarrassing for you when the then Deputy Premier came out like a couple of days later and said, oh, actually, no.
We're going to. This is part of the work that you do in terms of reform, and the government is still considering the issue. And I will say at the very outset that religion and faith of all types will always and continue to be at the heart of any decisions that we make. And I also point out that we very much respect the work of the Catholic faith in their work in delivering and being a part of cemetery delivery for about 152 years across Sydney. So this is a decision that we need to ensure the future perpetual care of all Crown cemeteries across Sydney and future Crown cemeteries for the space that we need into the future, which is highlighted in the report.
If you do respect the role of the Catholic Church in the delivery of their services, why did you call them and give them a week's notice that the Catholic Metropolitan Cemeteries Trust was no longer going to have that role? That doesn't seem very respectful.
We'd had conversations and, as I said, this decision now is before Cabinet and we'll continue to work through that and the recommendations of the 11th hour report as we make a decision in the best interests of all those involved in the management of cemeteries across Sydney.
But Minister, it's November. You came out in May. You chose to come out in May and make a statement about the direction that this was heading. A couple of weeks after that, the Deputy Premier comes in, sort of suggests it's going in a different direction. This is now months and months and months of uncertainty and hassle for everyone involved. When is it going to be resolved and why has it taken so long?
Because we are continuing to committed to find a solution that gives people of New South Wales access to affordable faith, appropriate burial services, and we'll continue to have ongoing consultation. And as I said, this is a matter for Cabinet at the moment, and as such, I'm limited to the comments and what I can participate in this conversation around.
Minister, earlier in response to one of my colleagues' questions, you said that the faith-based organisations still have a role. Does that include a role in administration of cemeteries trusts, or is
a
it
role
just
in the cemeteries and being able to be buried in Crown cemeteries across New South Wales, across Sydney, sorry. As you know, Mr Veach, in country New South Wales, it's our councils that predominantly manage our cemeteries, and as you know, faith is very much a part of the delivery of those services in our country-based cemeteries. But we'll continue to have conversations around this.
So just to be clear, I mean, I appreciate, we're not going to be able to get anything particularly firm because you're saying it's before Cabinet.
That's right, Rose.
Based on what you've just said, will you guarantee today that faith-based providers will continue to have a role in the provision of cemetery services in whatever model you go forward with? Because they've been waiting months and months for some certainty. Will you at least guarantee today that they will have a role?
Faith will always have a role in the delivery of cemetery and burial services across Sydney and New South Wales.
How can you say that when you in May made an announcement that you were going to wind up all of the faith-based trusts into one Crown and have an entirely, single secular entity? How can you say they'll always have that role when you literally announced in May that they wouldn't?
As I just pointed out to your colleague, the Honourable Mick Veach, faith is still very much at the centre of all burials and cremations across New South Wales, even when councils are providing those services. Faith and religion must be at the heart of decisions and how we respect those when they are passing across Sydney and New South Wales.
I'm not talking about a general role where people can come and pray if they want to. Of course they can do that. I'm talking about, will you guarantee a specific role in the administration, an actual role in the administration of this going forward?
As I've said, the matter is a matter for Cabinet to be deliberating at this time, and I will always give a commitment that faith will be at the heart of how we operate and have access to our cemeteries into the future. But I am limited to the amount of what I can say on this issue because it is currently a matter for Cabinet.
So, one Crown isn't a step towards corporatising the operation of cemeteries in Sydney, Minister? You said no before.
No.
No? And what about privatisation?
No.
No? So the cemeteries won't be privatised? What about going down the track if there's a change in Minister or in this area? Can we guarantee they still won't be privatised?
That's, I don't know what a future Labor government might do.
Minister, the reason that we ask is because the person that you appointed to write the 11th hour report, Tim Scott, had previously submitted an unsolicited proposal specifically to privatise the cemeteries in New South Wales. And so it's not a hypothetical question. The author of the report, previous to authoring it on your behalf, had proposed that and is now saying that the government may wish to reconsider its role. So that's why people are worried that you're looking to corporatise and privatise.
We're not.
Okay. Minister, there's been a couple of recent media articles around this issue, certainly around Michael West Media and another article on the 3rd of November by Callum Foote. Have you conducted any investigations into how some of the material found its way into those particular media stories?
Yes, and I'm going to ask Kirsten Fishburn to address this question because I did seek some counsel and some advice on how those articles did appear.
Thank you very much, Minister. Obviously, that was quite concerning to us at the department to see those articles. I have initiated a full investigation into whether any material came out of the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. The investigation is nearly complete. It looks like there was not a leak from my own department, and I will be providing advice back to the Minister once the investigation is fully concluded.
Just it's the obvious question, but the time frame for that. So the report you say is coming to you soon. You will then provide that to the Minister for the Minister's consideration and response?
No, it's not a matter for the Minister. If there was an issue in my department, it is a matter for me. But as a professional courtesy, and as the Minister referred it to me, I will obviously provide feedback to the Minister, and I will take any necessary action should they be required.
Minister, you heard though, Ms Fishburn, that's excellent that that's happened. Indicate that preliminary findings, although not complete, almost complete, suggest that DPIE was not the source of that information, which is obviously good. Where else could it have come from? Who else had that
I'll look
access to that
forward to
information?
getting the report from Kirsten Fishburn to analyse what information has been publicly available and who may have had that information, and we'll continue to look at that issue because I am concerned when I see reports and information that's being made public. I don't like to see that. It's unfair to all stakeholders.
So DPC had that information, did it? Could have come from DPC?
I'll wait till I see Kirsten Fishburn's.
Did Treasury have that information?
I'm not speculating at this point in time, but part of what I've asked for is some advice on where the information might have gone elsewhere. So.
And
Ministerial colleagues? Do you suspect maybe possibly any ministerial colleagues, Minister?
No.
And so, Ms Fishburn, if there are findings or indications that that information may have come from elsewhere that wasn't DPIE, if that is potentially a lead there in the report that you do within DPIE, will you make sure that that is referred to other departments to follow up?
Of course.
And Minister, your view is that this was it's unsatisfactory for this to have occurred.
Absolutely.
Does it undermine the process around Cabinet making consideration in this area?
Look, any leak undermines any process.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear, you know, it was a screenshot of a cabinet minute. I mean, it was right at the heart, Minister, of the kind of information that should not be in the public domain. And so, you know, we want to be making, and I agree with you that it does make it more difficult for Cabinet to have open discussions if people are feeling as though that kind of thing is going to go on. So it's good that Ms Fishburn's looking into DPIE and that is looking positive, but if that's not where it's come from, what are you going to do to make sure that your submissions to the Cabinet are not undermined in that way?
I'll receive the report from Ms Fishburn, and at this point I won't deal with hypotheticals, but I am concerned about the leak and I don't accept them, and they are not good for government process.
Are you open to referring the matter to the police?
I'll be looking at all avenues, and I'm not going to deal in hypotheticals. I'll look at the facts before me. Thank you.
Minister, what was the process undertaken in choosing Lee Shearer as the administrator?
She has been a former Deputy Commissioner of the New South Wales Police, has been appointed by your side of politics many times for important investigations, such as by John Watkins and Carl Scully. She has the respect of both sides of politics. She's greatly respected too by Anthony Roberts, who's appointed her to a number of roles. Look, I've got the highest regard for Lee Shearer. She's served our state well as a Deputy Commissioner, and it's with those recommendations and her history of work and capacity this was the reason she was appointed.
There's a number of different ways of paying administrators when they're allocated across government. Sometimes employee, sometimes they're a contractor, or sometimes other arrangements. What are the arrangements for remunerating Lee Shearer for this role? Do you know?
Ms Shearer's on a contract as administrator.
A contract basis, and so paid in accordance with that contract.
That's correct.
Are you aware of any potential declarations of conflict of interest in relation to Ms Shearer's role?
No, I'm not.
Have you asked, is there a standard process in relation to declarations of conflict of interest for administrator roles such as this?
There's a standard process for declarations of conflicts of interest more generally for any contractor or employee.
And there was, and Ms Shearer would have been subjected to those, and there was nothing that came up as part of that drew your attention?
Correct.
Sure. I'll ask some questions about housing now. All right, move on from that one for a little bit.
The flavour of the time.
Quite appropriately so.
How many social housing properties were sold in 2020-2021?
Look, I'll take that on notice, but I did do some other research which showed the number of properties that LAC has sold in the past 3 years compared to Labor's last 3 years
That's
is
not
78%
the question that I asked,
less.
though, Minister.
No,
So-
but that's the answer I'm providing, Ms Jackson.
Can you also presumably take on notice if you don't know the revenue generated from the sale of social housing in 2020, 2021?
And just in terms of context, it's really important to understand that Land and Housing was established around 2001 by a former Labor government with good intentions to better utilise the land and the stock we have to recycle and create opportunities. And I'm very proud of the work that we are doing with Land and Housing. What's today? Friday. Only Wednesday I was in Newcastle and inspected 70 new properties in a really important suburb in Newcastle and actually signing a memorandum of understanding, our first official memorandum of understanding with Nadatali, the Mayor of Newcastle.
Yep, that's great. Nothing to do with the revenue generated from the sale
No, but
of social
actually
housing.
everything has to do with this issue.
Very important. Right?
There are 5,000 properties in the Newcastle local government area that are owned by Land and Housing. And as we were stood on a street corner where there was 3 fibro shacks and now there are 18 new apartments going in, this is exactly the type of conversations that we need to be
Mr. Martin
having.
or Mr. Poulos wish to ask you about that later, good for them. So I'm asking you why the department has abandoned the social affordable and build to rent project in Redfern at 600 to 660 Elizabeth Street, Redfern, in fact, which was announced by, in fact, Minister Goward when she was Housing Minister as the first dedicated build-to-rent model in New South Wales, and has now been abandoned and is, in fact, 70% private build for sale.
Rose, that's a really good question, and I'm going to refer to Mick Castle to deal with some of the details around that and some of the challenges we have in building and renewing our housing stock in the City of Sydney.
Thank you, Minister.
I don't actually think he's...
Hang on, I will just...
Well, he hasn't
We
been
need to
told.
swear him in.
No, I will take that opportunity. I was hoping to do it in the changeover of time, but that's fine. Now that we have you, Mr. Castle and Ms. Hawes, we'll swear you both in. So starting with you, Mr. Castle.
I, Michael Castle, swear that the evidence now and about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. And Ms. Hawes? I think you may be on mute.
Sorry about that. I, Melanie Hawes, solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Okay, thank you. I think, Minister, you were deferring to Mr. Castle.
Right.
Thank you, Minister. I can talk about the transaction and why the change in direction. Originally, when that project was announced, the expected would have been around 500 homes, and that would have allowed us to do a larger percentage of social homes in that regard, and it would have allowed enough density there or enough mass for a properly managed build-to-rent standalone environment. Unfortunately, the planning proposal, when it moved through Gateway, has come down to around 310 apartments. In speaking to all those that expressed interest in the project in its original form at around that 450 to 500 dwellings, the interest had waned because the yield was not significant enough. That's allowed us to go back and reassess, and we're in a position now where we believe the best outcome to generate the most social housing is through a sale and buyback opportunity.
I mean, it is pretty disappointing, Minister. It's gone from 500 social affordable build-to-rent properties to 300 properties, 90 of which will be social housing, and the only answer to that is the planning gateway. That's going to be what is determining whether or not we can have
And the
social and
City of
affordable
Sydney
housing.
Council. I I share the disappointment, Rose, and I might ask Ms Fishburn to detail more of those challenges. You know, we have a major community discussion at this moment about affordable housing and opportunity, and when we have council saying no to important uplift and important opportunities, that doesn't work in the community's favour.
I mean, I'm not sure it is fair to blame the council, considering they said to you, at least can we have, on top of the 30% social housing, 10% affordable housing and land and housing, and your department came back and said no to that.
Our plan was for 500 properties that was going to make that project viable, and that was rejected, and that's the basis of the issue.
I mean, I appreciate that, but they've come back to you and said, can we at least have 10% affordable housing on top of the 30% social housing? And you've rejected that. I mean, I don't think the 10% affordable housing is enough, but it's better than 0%, which seems to be your position.
We have to be able to manage our stock and our agencies and how we do our future work.
10% affordable housing, not even social housing. And 10% affordable housing is too much for you.
Which is why we're getting on with the job, and in regional New South Wales, we're going to have 312 new properties coming online in the next financial year, because we have councils and communities that want the housing and these opportunities, whether it be in Newcastle, Maitland, where I was on Wednesday, Kempsey, Wallhope, Tweed Heads. We are getting on with the job, but it is difficult to be able to create a model that gives us the ability to provide the amount of housing that we wanted.
This is in the middle of Redfern. The value that you are going to get from the private build to sell on those apartments is massive. You know that. This is going to be a very sweet little earner. Hundreds of properties coming online in Redfern, and you couldn't even say yes to 10% affordable housing.
What we want to do is to be able to manage our investments and the support of the projects that we put forward.
Thank you. I'll throw to Ms Hurst.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, Minister. Minister, you recently announced an additional $183 million dedicated to fast-track more than 1,400 new social and affordable homes in New South Wales. Given the ongoing issues that we've seen with people experiencing homelessness, struggling to find accommodation that is companion animal friendly, has your office ensured that these properties are designed to be companion animal friendly?
It's a really great question, and whilst there's been some changes at a state level through planning allowing companion animals, there are a lot of tenants within social housing that do have pets, and to be fair, Emma, some of those tenants and some of those bigger dogs and animals actually prove to be very challenging in terms of maintenance of our budgets and those type of issues. But as you know, I'm an animal lover, a dog lover, and so I do believe that companion animals play a very big part in the well-being of people. And
I think the bigger issue here, Minister, as well, we've actually held quite a few roundtables with domestic violence organisations and various other groups, and the fact that a lot of people will remain either in dangerous situations or remain homeless because if they can't take their animals with them. But I think...
and Ms Fishburn has got some important issues
yes,
to add.
Thank you. I just wanted to add something to that. With your permission, Minister, we're in another part of the portfolio of the department. We have the responsibility for the Companion Animals Act, as I'm sure you're aware, and this matter has actually been raised at the Responsible Pet Ownership Group, more broadly as a discussion about pets in apartments and looking at both strata controls and what planning controls in the DCPs, council DCPs maybe should be put into place. Some councils have actually done some quite positive work on that, and those DCPs would directly obviously impact into Minister Pavey's portfolio as well. I think you raise a very good point, and with the Minister's permission, I'm happy to bring this up at the Responsible Pet Ownership Group as a topic for them to consider, because of course there are challenges, but that is the right mechanism through government to have those type of discussions. Minister, if you're satisfied?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think Mr Castle has something to add as well in relation to some of the tenancy issues within land and housing.
Thank you.
So I should be really clear. Thank you, Minister. The management of the tenants is controlled by Department of Communities and Justice. Land and Housing Corp looks after the assets. Tenancy rules and the keeping of animals, etc., not only comes under the legislation, but is managed by them. So I think the question of how many pets a tenant can have, etc., should be referred to the Department of Communities and Justice. On the design of the properties, our properties comply with all the latest design standards, and we do take into account making sure that there's sufficient outdoor space and the properties are properly designed.
Thank you. And so further to that, I mean, I guess that's actually the crux of the question there, because the roundtables that I've been having is every single service group is saying that any kind of new housing that's being built needs to be designed to be animal friendly, because this is an ongoing issue. It's not so much how many pets people can have. That's not the issue. The issue is that people remain in dangerous situations or they remain homeless if they can't take the animals with them. So when you say that the design standards are all being met, does that include the idea that the actual property would be animal friendly?
Well, I can't speak to what's been said at the roundtables because I haven't.
No, sorry. The only thing that came out of the roundtables was that the organisations in this space are calling for that, to make sure that change is actually put into place. And so my question to you is, are the design standards inclusive of that?
Well, I don't know specifically what they're referring to. All I can do is take that question on notice and be able to respond when I talk to the design teams around what that criteria is, and we meet.
Okay, thank you. So that question on notice would be, do the design standards actually consider developing the property to be animal friendly? Thank you for taking that on notice. Minister, you recently announced a 30-kilometre exclusion fence in southwest New South Wales to stop wild pigs entering local farmland. Are you aware that Rspca Australia has raised significant animal welfare concerns with exclusion fencing, including the fact that it can cause native animals injury, distress and prolonged death through starvation, thirst or exposure?
Where was that fencing, Emma?
The fencing is, it's come off a press release from you, Derton. Have I pronounced that correctly?
Yeah, you have Derton, yes.
Yep. 30-kilometre fence.
Okay. Is that a Crown Lands?
Yes, Minister.
So Mel
we do. Yes, thank you.
So this is our Deputy Secretary for Crown Lands, Mel Hawes.
Thank you.
Thanks. So the question was, am I aware that Rspca concerns about exclusion fencing generally?
Yeah, their concerns are their significant animal welfare concerns, and whether the views of experts were actually taken into account in determining the building of this fence.
So I'll need to take on notice how the design specs were put together, but we exercise best practice. As you'd appreciate, as a public land management agency, we have responsibilities that include, the management of feral animals and various landholder interests. I'll take on notice and get to you the design specs, and I'd happily be, if you refer your contact in the Rspca to me, to have a discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
No, I think it's me first. Minister, just picking up on some of your comments in terms of your question from the opposition, you mentioned Lee Shearer and that she was appointed roles under Labor. Can you on notice tell us what roles that she was appointed to during that time? To my understanding, she wasn't appointed to any roles once she left the COPS. And whether you can clarify whether she was an assistant commissioner or a deputy commissioner, because
I thought it was deputy commissioner, but you forgot how to read it. I was told deputy commissioner. And I will, actually, you don't even have to take it on notice.
Okay.
I've got that information just somewhere here. Give me a second. So in 2005, she was the lead legal response for the Cronulla riots, appointed by Carl Scully.
Okay.
In 2005-2006, she was the lead legal response for the Diane Brimble death on the P&O cruise ship, appointed by Carl Scully and John Watkins. 2005-06, she was the lead legal negotiations for New South Wales Police work cover investigation of the Redfern riots, appointed by Carl Scully and John Watkins. In 2008, Newcastle licensing intervention, appointed by David Campbell and Tony Kelly. Review of development of a new use for public school in Newcastle by Jodie Mackay. 2012-2013 reviews into fair trading by Anthony Roberts. Set up resources regulator under Anthony Roberts. I think you worked with her then, didn't you, Michael? 2017-2019 Coordinator General Central Coast and Resources Regulator, the architect of the SEP for the development of Aboriginal lands under Anthony Roberts. She reviewed the riots at Frank Baxter Juvenile Justice Centre for Gareth Ward in 2019, and in 2020 she was appointed Recovery Coordinator for Wamberal by the Premier and the Minister for Police and Emergency Services.
Okay, so her current role now with Crown Cemeteries, does that include clearing out dead wood in terms of CEOs? Because my understanding is they've lost 4 CEOs in 12 months. So it seems to be a bit of a toxic culture developing there, where four CEOs, and I don't particularly wish to name them, but 4 CEOs have either been sacked or resigned. So
I think we'd need to take that question on notice in terms of the accuracy of that claim. In relation to the work that she is doing, essentially, there was four boards that have been that have been replaced by her administration. That is going some way. Sorry,
that may be what it is, Minister.
Okay, well, that's a very, very different thing than you've been told and briefed on, Mr. Banasiak.
Well, I'll allow you to take it on notice. I'll move on. Through you, I might refer this to Ms Hawes, because this is a question that was taken on notice regarding the Yarrie Lake Flora and Fauna Trust. I asked some questions around why financials hadn't been presented in the last 10 years or longer. Ms Hawes, in your response, you said that Yarrie Lake Flora and Fauna Land Trust last presented financial statements in year 2010-11, and the department is currently working with the land manager to meet its financial reporting requirements for 2019-2020. Am I right in assuming from that statement that the department is essentially writing off the financials from 2012 to 2018 and any impropriety that may or may not have occurred during that time period?
No, not at all. What I'll say is that a number of our community Crown Land managers are volunteers, and we have been progressively working with them for some time now to develop their capacity to provide annual returns under contemporary kind of standards. We have annual returns for the 2017-2018 financial years from Yarrie, and we are working with them on the current annual return, which is expected imminently. So since we spoke last time, there's been some progress in improving the capacity of this particular Crown Land manager to provide annual reports.
Okay. And one part of the other question was that the current board term expired on the 22nd of September this year. Has a new board been elected? And with that new board, what oversight are you actually placing over that board to make sure that we don't get into the situation where we have 10 years worth of financial reporting not happening?
Well, as I said before, some of those standards and requirements are fairly recent, and we're working with volunteer-based community boards, some of which are very small and provide their time along with aspects of a busy life on a voluntary basis to provide this important function for others. So the board it expired in September, as you're aware, and the new board has yet to be formally appointed.
Okay. When will they be formally appointed? Do you know? Do you have a rough date?
I can't really give a specific date here.
Okay, sure.
It's under assessment at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Minister,
that's around Narrabri, isn't it? Is that yeah.
Yeah. Minister, I might just quickly turn to Matrix Constructions. You're familiar with the situation that's happening there with Matrix Constructions. They've got a contract to build some housing for Land and Housing Corporation in Wadra, and they haven't been paying their subcontractors.
Yes, I have been briefed ever so. Yes, I have, but I'm going to go to Mick Castle or to Kirsten to go into more details about that.
No, I'd have to ask Mr. Castle.
Yeah, sure. Well, through you, Minister, I might just direct my questions through him, but feel free to jump in.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. So, Mr. Castle, why has Land and Housing Corporation continued to pay Matrix when you've been advised that subcontractors are not being paid?
Thank you. First of all, I want to say we're in the process of terminating the contract with the organisation for a breach of contract with us. There are a whole series of steps that we need to go through in assessing claims from a contractor and paying them, and that includes the Security of Payment Act. I believe in this case, though, the police are investigating, and because that investigation is on foot, I wish to leave it until, or leave any further comment until that investigation is complete.
Okay, thank you. I might try some follow-up questions afterwards, but I'll throw to Mr. Shearer.
Did you want to finish?
No, you.
Have the next round clear.
No, you go. That's fine.
Minister, nice to see you.
You too, as always.
You know, we miss you in the upper house.
I don't miss you as much.
Yeah.
I love having an electorate.
Yeah.
Like Barraville.
Minister, are you still committed to the recommendations set out in the 11th hour report?
I'm committed to finding a way forward with other members of my government to ensure that that we deal with the issues of perpetual funding as well as future supply of cemeteries across Sydney.
Well, the New South Wales government has already approved I think the 42 recommendations in that report. Is that still the current status?
As you know, and I watched your questions to my ministerial colleague, Minister Tudor-Hope, this currently is a matter for Cabinet, and due to that, we are, as I've said, committed to reform and security of ability for burials and crematorium space into the future for Sydney. It's certainly a challenge that our government is dealing with and will involve the views of all faiths in that process. Do you join with the Premier in making a commitment that any reform in this space will only be in accordance with ICAC's direct dealing guidelines? Absolutely.
Is it true that one of the proposals currently being considered by the government is not consistent with ICAC direct dealings guidelines, and in fact your department's provided you that advice?
I'm going to also add, having read the evidence from Wednesday, and this is the only detail I am prepared to go into, despite the claims that it was Minister Tudor-Hope that brought forward other proposals to Cabinet. In fact, any proposal being put forward to Cabinet on this subject is being put forward by me as the responsible minister. But I will limit my contribution to that to also point out that it is before Cabinet, so therefore I'm limited to what I can discuss, but I join with the Premier in affirming and reaffirming that we will not do anything that goes outside our direct dealing guidelines and the rules established through DPC and within ICAC guidelines.
Minister, have you met with the Catholic Metropolitan Cemeteries Trust or the Catholic Cemeteries Board?
I have over time, and I'm prepared on notice to provide you with the details of the meeting times over the past 2.5 years. I'll take that on notice.
All right, I appreciate that, Minister. When was the last time you met with the Catholic Cemeteries Board?
it would be 4 to 5 months ago, I think. I don't have a date in front of me, but I will provide that on notice.
Mr. Wright, are you able to indicate which, if any, of the 42 recommendations that were adopted by the government in the 11th hour report have actually been implemented?
In terms of what might happen with the Crown Cemetery sector and consolidation, that's, as the Minister's indicated, that's a matter before Cabinet.
I'm not asking about the future. I'm asking, sitting here now, how many of the 42 recommendations have been implemented?
I'll take that on notice.
Which of the 42 recommendations have been implemented, Mr. Wright?
And I'll also take that on notice.
Minister, do you stand by the conclusion in the 11th hour report that sustainable reform in the sector requires immediate action in 3 key areas, being consolidation of the Crown sector operators, the acquisition of land for new cemeteries, and a strengthening of the industry regulator? Do you stand by that fundamental conclusion in the 11th hour report?
I think they're important principles that we should be looking towards into the future, and we'll continue to work with those recommendations, and also acknowledging the work of the faith sector, and I will highlight the work of the Catholic Church over the past 152 or so years in Sydney. They've been very much involved in burials at Liverpool and at Rookwood Necropolis. They've been a very big part of how the cemeteries have run across this city, but we also need to ensure, and we've consolidated 4 of those trusts currently, which is under the administration of Shearer. We've already seen significant savings already by that consolidation, and it's a continuation of the reform that was started in 2014 by this government. There were many trusts, and what we're doing with those 4 trusts coming together is being able to see more clearly the perpetual liabilities that may be there, but also the opportunities for streamlining and working with each other. But it is an important decision that we are making, and it is before Cabinet at this time.
Minister, do you accept it would be a breach of the Ministerial Code of Conduct to seek to progress a proposal that was unlawful?
Clearly, I'll be following the advice from DPC, our direct dealing guidelines, and we'll continue to have conversations within government, and we will do the right thing in terms of ensuring that we have space for the future, as well as the ability to manage the cemeteries across Sydney, the Sydney Basin that we have.
Now, but if you could answer my question, do you accept that it is a breach of the Ministerial Code of Conduct to direct officials to work on or advance a project that is unlawful? To accept that's a breach of the Ministerial Code.
I won't be breaching any codes in the fulfilment of my work in this important space.
Greetings, Minister. It's very good to see you. And equally, Ms Fishburn, can I just convey my congratulations to you upon your appointment as Secretary, and also thank the work that all the agencies present have done in the last 16 weeks especially as well.
Thank you.
Minister, do you have confidence in David Parker as Valuer General?
I thank you, Mr Mookie, for your question. And as you know, the Office of the Valuer General is an independent statutory officer within the New South Wales Government, and you probably have been involved and have seen more information in terms of the role and some of the issues that have been raised in your position on the Joint Standing Committee. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that you have also an important responsibility. Have had an important
responsibility. For that 1 month that I had to serve on that committee, you are dead right, Minister. I do have an important responsibility responsibility, but as the Minister, you do too. And I can't but help note that you've so far declined to express your confidence in David Parker as Valuer General. And just to be fair to you and to be fair to him, I'll just ask again, do you have confidence in David Parker as Valuer General?
I think from the feedback I'm getting from industry and other parts of New South Wales, there is strong confidence in the work that he is doing, but there has been some challenges, and I'm going to have Michael Wright address some of those challenges.
We'll get to Mr Wright, I have no doubt, and I will ask Mr Wright for some questions soon. But again, Minister, I just can't but help notice that you declined to express your confidence in him. And the reason I'm asking you this is because he came before a parliamentary inquiry and said to us that he had a meeting with you in which you expressed to him directly your confidence in him. Did you have a meeting with the Valuer General in which you expressed your confidence in him?
I had a phone conversation with him where we discussed some of the challenges, and I said that we needed to ensure that good work from the office continues and that our staff feel valued, protected and supported, and that there were, and I was told there were some management processes in place, which I'll have Michael Wright address. But it is important to understand he is an independent statutory officer, and a lot of the work, the important work and the good work, I might add, that you did on that committee was ensuring that we weren't interfering in an independent statutory officer role, and I can guarantee that we haven't interfered and won't interfere. This is a management issue, and the staff and the welfare of staff is the responsibility of the officials beside me here today, and we'll continue to work through that. There has been some challenging moments, there is no doubt, and there's some very good people working through those issues, and I'd like to refer to them to explain some of those issues.
I will get to them in a very short period of time, Minister. I've not got too many questions for you at this point in time on this specific issue because, as you rightly say, perhaps the evidence needs to come from the department officials and not necessarily the Minister. But this was evidence that the Valuer General provided directly to the Parliament about a conversation that he had directly with you, for which you are the only person who can validate it. And I can't but help notice that there is a discrepancy in your account and his account. He
no,
let me finish, Minister.
I just agreed with you that I did speak with him.
No, let me just finish. He was very, very clear that you had expressed your confidence in him directly, but the way you just described it was that you raised some concerns to do with his performance in respect to the office. Now, are you confident that the Valuer General at all times has treated all his staff with the adequate levels of respect that you would expect from what, as you describe it, an independent statutory officer?
And I'm not involved in the management of staff on a day-to-day basis, so I'm not at liberty or able to give an assessment on that question.
Can I now then turn to perhaps Ms Fishburn before we get to Mr Wright, if that's possible? Ms Fishburn, or actually Mr Wright, whoever knows this information, how many FTE are there at the Valuer General's office that are directly employed by the department?
I think it's about 120, but I can take that on notice and give you a more exact answer.
That accords with what he told us, so I presume that is correct, therefore, that it's 120. And as I understand it, there are 8 others who are not directly employed or thereabouts. Is that fair? We employ contractors. Is that what you mean? Look, perhaps on notice, can you provide us with a full head count as to how many people are working at the Valuer General, and how many of them are directly employed by the department, and how many are directly employed in whatever other arrangement? Yeah. Thank you. Ms Fishburn, has the department received any complaints from staff in relation to the Valuer General?
I can confirm that there are a number of investigations underway in relation to matters concerning staff and the Valuer General. These matters, as you know, have been the subject of both public and in-camera hearings by the Joint Standing Committee on the Office of the Valuer General. The Joint Standing Committee has the role to provide oversight in these matters, and their role is ongoing. The committee has been provided with significant material by both the Valuer General and the department, and it is the department's intention to provide the committee with the outcome of the current investigations.
Thank you.
Noting that it wouldn't be appropriate for me to discuss it further.
I accept that you think it's not appropriate to discuss it further, but you are the employer of these people, and therefore we're here because this doesn't involve the operation of the Valuer General under the Act. It involves the treatment of the staff that you employ as well, and this is a budget estimates hearing. How many complaints have you received?
I would have to take on notice.
Over what period of time have you received complaints?
I'd have to take that on notice.
What due diligence have you undertaken? Well, what are the nature of the complaints?
I'd have to take that on notice.
Who is doing these?
Ms. Fishburn spent 4 days in the role.
Okay, well, Mr. Wright, do you have this information?
I don't have this information at hand. We can take that on notice.
Does anyone here who's on the panel have any of this information?
No.
How do you know that, Mr. Wright?
Because I'm aware of the witnesses and what information they have.
You're honestly telling me, coming here, that no one knows from the department how many of your own staff have put complaints in about the Valuer General? We are seriously having that as the evidence that's been put to us today.
I take on notice the number of complaints we've received. I don't have the figure in front of me.
What about the nature of the complaints? I mean, let's be honest, the Valuer General has been far more candid about this than the department staff is. What is the nature of the complaints that have been received from your staff about the Valuer General?
What I would say is that the staff have raised complaints about their well-being, and as the Secretary's indicated, there's an investigation into the nature of those concerns, and we will await the conclusion of that report.
Well, who is doing the investigation?
The investigation is being undertaken by an independent investigator.
Who?
I'll have to take that on notice, but I'm happy to get the information for you.
Who's doing the investigation?
An independent investigator, as the Secretary's indicated. I'll take on notice and we will provide you with the name of the investigator. How much is we paying
for this independent investigation that no one seems here to be able to tell us about? How much are we paying for it?
Take that on notice.
When did it start?
The investigation commenced, this particular investigation commenced approximately 2.5 weeks ago. I'm just trying to think back to that. It was commissioned by myself in the role of acting secretary at that time in consultation with my general counsel.
Was that the first time the department was made aware of these complaints?
No, as I detailed to you, there has been oversight and information provided through the Joint Standing Committee, as is the right place to provide that information over time. This is looking at
the Joint Standing Committee oversights his conduct in respect to his statutory functions. These are about the employment functions of people who work for your department.
And the investigation that's underway, as I detailed, is in relation to the staff who are there. It's a staffing matter. It's a health and wellbeing matter.
Have you received complaints prior to the commencement of that investigation? Minister, that seems to be yes.
There was before I commenced in this role, there was a WHS investigation conducted by the department, I think.
So the Valuer General has now been subjected to 2 investigations at least.
In mid-20.
Mid-2020. The Valuer General started in January 2020, is that correct?
That's my understanding. Again, before I commenced,
So
but I think it was January 2020.
January 2020 and mid-2020,
Might have been before that.
The evidence he gave us was that I think he commenced in January 2020, but Minister, I accept you might be right. It might be earlier.
No, you are correct, Minister. It was the 23rd of October 2019 when the Governor, who is obviously the person who appoints Professor David Parker, appointed him, and he commenced in the office 20th of January 2020.
Between 23 October 2020, 19 and mid-2020, a first set of complaints were made about the Valuer General, correct?
That's my understanding. I wasn't with the department at that time.
And that led to an investigation at that time?
That's my understanding, yes.
And who did that investigation?
My understanding it was done by our internal legal department.
And what was the nature of the complaints that were received at that time that were investigated?
Again, I would have to take that on notice, but my understanding it was general concerns about the well-being of the staff.
And was that then given to the then Secretary, Mr. Betts?
I am quite sure that Mr. Betts was given that report.
Yes, I can confirm Mr. Betts was provided with that information.
Did that investigation uphold the complaints that were made by the VG staff or your staff attached to the VG's office?
I can confirm that, and it is obviously on the record, that the then Secretary of DPI reviewed the investigation that had been undertaken and put in place new administrative functions to ensure that
was that a direction from Mr. Betts to the Valuer General that restricted him to only talking to, at that time, 4 members of his office?
As I detailed, it was to put in place certain administrative arrangements.
And was those administrations an explicit instruction from Mr. Betts to Mr. Barker that he was only legally authorised to talk to 4 of the 120 people at that office?
It was an administrative arrangement put in place by the previous Secretary.
Mr. Parker has said to us that he was ordered by Mr. Betts to only speak to 4 out of 120 of his staff. He described this as an attack on his independence from government. So I want to put you the first proposition. Did your department or your predecessor make an instruction to Mr. Parker that restricted him to speaking to only 4 of his 120 staff?
I can't confirm whether it was 4 or 5, but I can say it was narrowing down the lines of communication as part of an administrative
And I would say, sorry, I'll just clarify, it was limited to a number of executives in VGNSW. So the intention was for the VG not to communicate with staff below the executive level.
And, Minister, the Valuer General described this as an attack on his independence from government, which I assume you reject.
You assume right.
Indeed. And then thereafter, after you put these restrictions on in 4, in your view, did the Valuer General stick by the restrictions that were put on him?
I think that's the question you probably need to ask the Valuer General.
No, it's a question I'm asking your department, given they're your staff, and rest assured, if you really would like me to ask the Valuer General, we're happy to call him back and ask him too.
I would say, based on my intelligence, my understanding is that the instruction has been adhered to.
He followed the instruction in the period to which it still applied, at that time 4, correct? To the best of your knowledge?
To the best of my knowledge.
Okay.
Executive level positions, as Mr. Wright detailed.
Thereafter, even though he was subject to these restrictions, additional complaints have been received by his staff, by your staff who are attached to the VG's office. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And how is it possible then, are any of those complaints arising from the people with whom the Valuer General is directly authorised to communicate?
As I said, I don't have the full detail in front of me.
Given, Secretary, you confirmed that you commissioned this 2.5 weeks ago, is that because that's when you received these complaints?
There had been complaints received, to my understanding. I don't have the exact date, so I don't want to.
But is it thereabouts,
give you a falsehood. Over a period of time, and it was deemed appropriate to undertake an investigation.
I don't dispute that it is appropriate for you to have ordered an investigation, which, to be fair, there's no criticism of you at all here, Secretary, whatsoever. But I'm assuming that you didn't wait to commission this investigation.
Not from my perspective. I can only answer what I personally did.
And did this complaint come directly to the department, or was it made through the VG office or through the structured administrative arrangements that were put in place?
I'd have to take that on this.
Well, the executive director is here. Did the complaints go to the executive director, or did it come directly to the department?
Can I just clarify that Alison McLaren, as an executive director, is only looking after one part of VGNSW, which is the Just Terms team. So we do have an executive director, VGNSW, Andrew Coffey, who has accountability for the broader organisation.
Miss, who is it? McLaren. Can I answer whether or not it came in respect to her from the part that she's responsible for?
Yes, some complaints have come through me.
Some. So there's more than that have come from the other aspect. Is that the implication of that evidence?
I can't answer what's gone through Mr. Coffey.
Okay. Are you able to identify how many of complaints have come through you?
I'd have to take that on notice.
I appreciate that.
May I clarify? There are
Just before we do, Ms. McLaren, when did those complaints come to you?
I have only been in this role since the end of August, so since that time.
So from August this year you received them, and I presume, did you pass them on to the department?
Yes.
Thank you. And who in the department did you pass it on to by title?
I went through the processes and passed them on to the HR department.
Which is, I presume, the policy, correct?
Yes.
And so there's absolutely no criticism whatsoever of any of the department staff, just to be clear about how this has been handled. But we've just now established that this has come from August, September. And is that what led you, Ms. Fishburn, to commission the review?
As you may be aware, I somewhat unexpectedly was acting in the role of secretary. This was one of the matters that was brought to my attention with very sound advice that, making sure that you don't take any allegation lightly, but equally people deserve natural justice, and you investigate to make sure that occurs as well. When this was brought to my attention, and I got the advice from my general counsel and from Mr. Wright that it would be a wise and sensible action to take to make sure we had investigated the claims, and that would give us some grounds if needs be, and I'm not speaking to the outcome of that. I still stick by my statement that the Joint Standing Committee is the right place for these matters to be discussed, but should needs be, it will give me some guidance on where to go next.
Rachel, how is a person who works for the Valuer General, what policy is in place that permits them to make a direct complaint to the Joint Committee?
They would not be making a complaint to the Joint Committee. We'll be tabling the investigative report. My staff are employed by me ultimately, and I have responsibility for their health and well-being. I also have responsibility ultimately for their complaint handling as well.
I ask you again, Ms Fishburn, do you have, given that you commissioned the report and the report's to you, which is again entirely appropriate, do you have any expectations as to when you expect to receive it?
Very soon. Ideally, I wouldn't want to be sitting in this chair having this conversation. So if the report could have come sooner, I would have appreciated that. But it takes time to do this type of work in a way that is respectful of both complainants and those who have been complained against.
Minister, were you aware of the second set of complaints that have come from August?
I was aware of complaints last year, but not the second set of complaints.
The first time you learnt about the second set of complaints is when I asked these questions here today?
To the best of my recollection, that is the case. I haven't,
And look, Minister, again, I'm not being critical, because as you rightly point out, this is a complicated matter with the statutory position of the Valuer General, but no one from the department told you that there was a second set of complaints that had come in about the Valuer General.
Look, I would have to take that on notice to be absolutely sure, but I don't recall being briefed in the past 2.5 weeks on the complaints that Mr. Clarence just pointed out.
That I have not personally briefed the Minister on that, and it's my report that I commissioned.
I accept that these arrangements are very complicated, as you've described, Minister. But just to be clear here, the Valuer General was your appointment, was he not?
It was an appointment that was part of the transition of government. I took over responsibility of the agencies and the Valuer General's office in 2019 in April, and I do recall meeting the Valuer General within a couple of months of my appointment here in an initial meeting at Parliament House, and it was the recommendation of all that had been part of the recruitment process that he'd come from South Australia, as I recall.
That's correct.
And that he was a good appointment. And it was a process that we needed to get to, because I recall the previous Valuer General had been ill, and there was some certainty and some consistency that we needed to get to. So I didn't want to delay that appointment, and there was no indication or reason to me why that should be delayed.
Okay, but is, broadly speaking, the summation of your answer there is that you appointed him on advice?
Yes.
That advice came presumably from the department?
Yes.
That is correct.
And you relied on the department to undertake the due diligence?
Yes.
And the department, as I think you just made some reference to, had a recruitment firm?
Yes.
I can speak to that.
Who was the recruitment firm?
That I can't actually speak to you. I can tell you about the recruitment process that was undertaken.
On notice, I'm happy to, but the specific question I have is on notice as well.
It's,
on notice, do you know, Mr.
No, I don't know who the recruitment firm was for certain. Do you, Mr. Wright?
No, I don't. We do have that information on file, of course.
In respect to the due diligence that they undertook on the Valuer General, do you recall receiving advice as to what due diligence was undertaken on the Valuer General at the time?
I recall having a conversation with the Group Secretary at the time, which wasn't Mr. Wright, that he had come well qualified with a good background and history in being a Valuer General, and it's a skill set that is quite
complex.
It's complex, and there's not a lot of people out there capable to fulfil this role. And I make the point that there'd been quite trauma, and in terms of the Office of Valuer General, this was an appointment I took on advice at a time when we needed to make a timely decision.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm not disputing that perhaps you did so with the best of intentions on advice, but Minister, I just did a Google search, right, a really basic one, and not even, to be honest with you, I did one this morning on this, and it didn't take me long to find an article from the Financial Review from 2006 in which it's clear that this particular Valuer General had to be moved on from the Commonwealth Valuation Office after complaints were made by their staff 2 decades ago about their well-being as well. I didn't get paid. I'm not the recruitment firm. But are we honestly suggesting that this was a proper due diligence process that was undertaken that led to the advice that caused you to appoint him? Surely we can agree that that whoever gave you that advice didn't check properly. Do you agree, Minister?
Well, I don't know all that is involved in that article, and, you know, if our Google history was to determine our forward history, for all of us, it mightn't look very pretty.
True, but to be fair, I mean, tendency and coincidence here, Minister, it's just a little too close to the bone in that 2 decades ago, the same issues were repeating in the Commonwealth Office.
And as I pointed out,
and now, as a result of the appointment that the government made, and you specifically on advice, this Valuer General has statutory independence, which makes it very difficult for you and others to deal with. Hence the question. Before we gave the Valuer General 7 years of or 10 years of tenure in a independent statutory office.
7. Yep.
7. Sorry, you were correct. I thought it changed. 7 years of a statutory office, which we never did the proper due diligence, did we? The government didn't check properly, did it?
I'm confident. I felt confident at the time the advice I was given was the appropriate advice. He'd come very well accredited, and I don't know the history or the circumstance behind the Google story that you have highlighted. And I imagine that there may have been some work done on that.
Printed and tabled, and you can have it.
But I imagine that would probably have been brought up in the consideration at the time.
So we appointed him knowing that he had this history?
I don't know that. I am just making the point that I'm assuming that the due diligence would have included that type of work. But the point is, there has been some really good work coming out of the office, despite some of the challenges in terms of the well-being of some of the staff and the concerns that we have heard and are acting on. So let's not, let's also look at the record and also look at the ability of the committee that you've now removed yourself from to look at.
It was removed in a nasty, had to move on, sadly. I was only there, but apparently we have to move on now as well.
Thank you, Minister. I might just throw back to Mr Castle and pick up where we left. Mr Castle, when did your office first become aware of Matrix Proprietary Limited not paying subcontractors?
So that I don't give any misleading statement there, I might just take that on notice. I know it was in the last couple of months, but the exact date I can't be fully sure of.
That's fine. I have a letter from a Peter Brackenred, the Executive Director, Delivery South of your office, where he states that there was correspondence on the 13th and 22nd of September, and then since that correspondence, your office received additional complaints but continued to pay Matrix Co-Proprietary Limited in good faith. So my question to you is, you received these complaints originally from an Oasis scaffolding, then you received additional complaints about other subcontractors not being paid, but you could still continue to pay Matrix Co-Proprietary Limited in good faith. Why was that the case?
So I don't know and I've only got your word for the letter. The process of paying contractors is very clear and outlined in the Security of Payments Act. We can't just not pay somebody because somebody's made a phone call to us and said he hasn't paid me. Part of the Security of Payments Act requires a statutory declaration to be produced by the contractor and provided to the principal before payment is made. And part of the project management role is to make sure the project is progressing and that the works that are being claimed are there. So I would need to do further investigation to suggest whether there was an opportunity for us not to pay him, and there would be no legal way we could make payment to the subcontractor that I'm aware of.
Okay, so you mentioned statutory declarations that were provided by Matrix. Given that clearly those stat decks are false, what recommendations are you making to police about those false stat decks, given that making a false stat deck carries a 2-year penalty?
So I can't determine whether the statutory declarations are false. I've read the same media articles that you've probably read, and I've listened to those that have contacted me about the matter. We've put it in the hands of the legal team. I'm advised that as of last week, we terminated, it's the 1st of October, we terminated the contract with the Matrix Group. Whether those statutory declarations were false or not, that's a matter for the police to determine. We've reported the incident to the police, and we need to let them do their work now.
Okay, in December 2020, this letter says that in December 2020 that your office undertook a review, including a financial check. What did that financial check include, given that this Matrix Co. has clearly failed to pay these subcontractors?
It sounds like they failed to pay them past when that financial check was taken. I don't know or don't have in front of me, and I don't want to.
Okay, well, perhaps on notice, can you do
on what they report, but I will take it on notice.
Thank you, Minister. Given that Mr. Castle's evidence is that we're terminating this contract, will you give an undertaking that this Matrix Co. Proprietary Limited will no longer receive contracts on behalf of Land and Housing Corporation, and will they be put on a do not contract list if one such exists?
We will.
Minister?
Yes?
Sorry, can add some advice that you may not be aware of. I'm advised that Matrix Co. has been put into administration as well. So the simple answer is they're highly unlikely they'll be around.
Okay, well, Minister, will you undertake that no Phoenix company rises from Matrix and gets given a contract?
I will do everything in our powers to ensure that those that are involved in this company that have been part of this process no longer meet the pre-qualifications, and that their history is recorded. I remember when I was Roads Minister, we dealt with many of these type of issues on the Pacific Highway, and we've put some really good safeguards in place with the Small Business Commissioner in New South Wales. But sadly, people, sometimes run their businesses in a way that isn't fair to those that are working for them. But we do have some better mechanisms in place through the Small Business Commissioner to protect the hard-working tradies and the good small business people of this state, and I'll do everything I can to ensure that those that don't look after those that are looking after us get punished or not rewarded. Okay, well, on notice, given that you did mention the Small Business Commissioner, can you on notice tell us where the Small Business Commissioner may have fallen down or didn't have the powers that he needed to deal with this particular situation? I'll see what involvement the Small Business Commissioner has had in that. It's not in my delegated authority as Minister, but I know the Small Business Commissioner at the time when we were doing work on the Pacific Highway was very supportive, and we did get payments for subbies and for contractors that had been left in the lurch. All right, thank you. I'll throw to Ms Hurst.
Thank you. Just going back to the Southwest New South Wales exclusion fence, I've just got a couple of questions to add on notice as well. Sorry, I was talking to one of the departmentals.
Melanie Hall.
Melanie Hall, thank you. Sorry about that.
The other Mel.
Yes. I've just got a couple of other questions just to place on notice, if that's all right. I just want to know whether what is being done to actually address the issue of the risk of native animals being caught in the fence, whether there was any consideration of this issue in designing and building the fence, and also if there's a plan to actually regularly check the fences for any animals that have been caught in the fence, particularly given that that's something that's been advised by the Rspca Australia when such fences are erected.
Thank you. I am actually able to answer that now if that's...
yeah, definitely.
Have some further advice. The fence was designed against best practice principles with animal welfare considerations in mind, and there are measures included in the design specs such as installing mesh wire rather than netting, which allows smaller fauna to get through, and there is no barbed wire on the top of the fence, which prevents harm to larger animals that may, move over the fence. So those considerations were taken into account.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. thank you for the opportunity to add to that question.
Thank you. And can I just place the rest of those questions then on notice that are outside of the scope of that answer? Sorry?
Absolutely, thanks.
Thank you. Minister, in regards to the wild pigs, I noticed on your media release on your website that you said that you'll be introducing further control measures if required. Can you please outline what those control measures would be?
Analysing where they are and what damage they're doing to other native wildlife. That's always an important process in managing native pigs, and it's one of the very, very tiny downsides of all this rain. Pigs love wet areas and they do enormous damage to some of our rural
Sorry, Minister,
land.
the question was just about what control measures would be used.
Well, it's about controlling and knowing where the numbers are and managing them and their impact on native habitat and wildlife.
But do you have any information about what those management strategies would be outside of the fencing?
I'll refer to Mel Hawes on that, on other controlled measures. But, it is important that we understand where they are and what damage they're doing.
Thanks, Minister. I think there are a network of public land managers in place across New South Wales, and we consider controls based on a local context. So it's quite difficult to answer in that global way. I mean, we would look at exclusion fencing type options using the best practice principles I've just described on a site-specific basis.
Thank you. Is there any consideration into things such as immunocontraceptives? I know that the CSIRO are working on fertility control measures in this space.
Yeah, there's always innovations in terms of more humane controls. I can take on notice specific research that we may become aware of or have within the department, but I'd prefer to take that on notice.
And we'll also, have you asked Minister Marshall about native pig immuno?
No, I haven't.
I'll see
Minister, you keep saying native,
I run out
native
of
pig.
time with my
I meant wild pig, yes. Absolutely right, Mr Shoebridge, because they're not native, they're bad.
I'm not sure of this species.
Quite happy to have native pigs.
But we didn't. That ship sailed. But they came in on sailing ships. So the issue is in relation to whether the Department of Primary Industries might be doing some work on that. We'll see what information we can find.
Thank you. Thanks. I'll throw to Mr Shoebridge now.
Thanks, Chair and Deputy Chair. Mr Wright, it's true, isn't it, that the government rejected a proposal brought by the Catholic Cemeteries Board in August of 2020, seeking the transfer of a substantial part of the public cemetery land to another archdiocese-owned company. That there was a proposal that was rejected in or about August of last year on that, wasn't there?
I wasn't with the department at the time, but I'm aware there was a proposal which was rejected.
Are you aware of concerns that have been? Well, sorry, the Catholic, the CMCT is a publicly owned trust, and it's public funds that are in that trust. That's right, isn't it, Mr.
That's
Wright?
my understanding.
Yep.
Yes.
Are you aware of concerns that a substantial amount of trust money was used for the development of that proposal by the Catholic Cemeteries Board for the 2020 proposal? Are you aware of concerns about that?
No, I'm not. I'm not aware of those concerns.
Minister, are you aware of concerns that in the order of $1 million of public money was used to develop the proposal to transfer a substantial part of public land to an archdiocese-owned company?
I'm aware of some of the conversations that you had at budget estimates on Wednesday, but I'm also again reminding you that we have a decision before Cabinet in relation to the future operation and management of cemeteries, and I'm very much interested in ensuring full transparency of perpetual funds and a management process which gives us secure transfer land into the future?
Well, Minister, I'm going to ask you to either take this on notice or if you have an answer now, provide an answer. Have funds from the publicly owned CMCT, the trust, have they been used for the purpose of developing one or more proposals to transfer land to an archdiocese-owned company?
I'm not aware of the details of that, but I will take that question on notice.
And if so, how much public money has been used for that? And can you provide an answer as to whether or not that was an approved use of trust funds?
If that is in fact the case, I will provide the information that I have on that we receive on that.
And can you, in providing those answers, advise the committee whether or not this matter had been raised in writing, and by that I include email communication, within the department last year?
I'll take that on notice. And Ms Fishburn, have you got...
I don't have any information, but the Minister wouldn't be privy to departmental emails.
And if it was raised, can you indicate what action was taken by the department in relation to that use of public monies?
Sorry, what was the last part of that question?
If the concerns were raised last year within the department, what, if any, action was taken about the use of public monies for such a purpose?
We'll take that on notice.
Minister, you would have read the Crown Land Commissioner's evaluation of the Crown Land Management Act 2016?
Yes.
Yep.
And then we've also got our strategic review, Crown Land strategic review, yep.
Two of the recommendations were in relation to the Western Lands lease conversions, recommendations 27 and 28. Could you just indulge me just for 2 minutes because we're about to lose these officials? Yep. The first recommendation was that the department establish methodologies to assess whether the sale of Western Lands leases is achieving the intent of the legislation to stimulate productivity and growth while also ensuring Western Lands resources are sustained in perpetuity. That's recommendation 27. Has the government accepted that?
There hasn't been, from my recollection, much actual take-up of the Western Land lease conversion process, but I'm looking over to Mel Hawes to see if she has... I might get Mel Hawes in a sec with just to do a bit of a mop-up, but I'm just asking whether or not you've accepted recommendation 27 or not. To the best of my recollection...
Minister,
sorry, Mel.
We're currently reviewing the Commissioners. We're currently... Minister, for your benefit, we're currently reviewing the report in order to provide information to assist a government response to that report to both yourself and Minister Stokes.
All right. Well, then I might go straight to Ms Hawes. Ms Hawes, the other recommendation that is recommendation 28, and I assume it's the same position in relation to recommendation 28, which is requesting the Valuer General review the Western Lands lease conversion program. Have there been...
Yes, it's the same response.
Right. Well, can you provide on notice how many properties have been sold, well, how many Western Land lease conversions have happened, who the beneficiaries were, who the purchasers were, and what the value was for each of those sales? Ms Hawes?
Yep. Yes, we can take that on notice. Is there a particular time frame?
Well, since the commencement of the Western Lands lease conversion, it's only been happening for the last few years.
2018, I think.
Yes, so if you could do it by financial year and including this year to date.
Yep, we can take that on notice.
Minister, have you sought to satisfy yourself whether or not the current sales formula of 3% of market value represents a reasonable return to the community?
I haven't looked into detail of the number of sales. I recall asking in the past 18 months or so, what's been the take-up, and in terms of that conversion of price to sale, no, I haven't sought any further details on that.
And my last two questions are this. Can you advise on what basis the 3% market value was created? I mean, how that figure was arrived at?
Okay, well, there would be a big policy platform when that was introduced in 2018. We'll provide you those details.
And are there any processes in place to determine whether or not purchasers of, well, however you want to describe it, the beneficiaries of the Western Lands lease conversion, property owners, go from leaseholders to freehold, are there any provisions in place to determine whether or not they're donors to political parties? And if so, what are those?
I'll take that on notice.
And are you aware of any of the people who've, or the entities, people and or corporations who've benefited from a Western Lands lease conversion has made any political donations?
I'm not aware.
Thank you. That takes us to 3:30, which is our COVID Glen 20 break. So we now have 15 minutes to... back for water at 3:45. So we thank the housing component of the public servants. You have taken some questions on notice, so the committee secretary will be in touch, and you'll have 21 days to get back to us with that. So we bid you farewell, and we'll bring the water public servants through at 3:45.
Thank you, Mr. Banasiak.
Right. Okay, welcome back to this afternoon's session on Budget Estimates 2021-2022 with Water, Property and Housing. We now welcome the public service around water. So in the order that I have in front of me, I will ask them to state their name and position, title and swear either an oath or affirmation, starting with Dr. Bentley.
Thank you, Chair. James Michael Bentley, Deputy Secretary Water in the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. I'll now go to Mr. George on WebEx.
Thank you. Andrew George, CEO of Water New South Wales. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And Mr. Shearer on WebEx as well.
Rock Chevreux, I'm the Managing Director of Sydney Water. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me.
Thank you. Mr. Cleary.
Thank you. Darren Cleary, Managing Director at Hunter Water. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr. Barnes.
Grant Barnes, Chief Regulatory Officer for the Natural Resources Access Regulator. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms. Jones.
Amanda Louise-Jones, Chief Strategy Officer, Deep High Water. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Levy. Oh, sorry, Ms. Levy, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry, I'm getting feedback. I'm hearing Amanda's recording coming to me. Sorry, Anissa Levy. I'm the CEO of Water Infrastructure New South Wales. I'm not.
We can hear you. We can hear you quite clearly, Ms. Levy. We're not getting that feedback that you're getting, but we'll get the committee secretary to try and work on that for you.
Thank you.
Can you just swear either an oath or affirmation, and we'll try and fix the issue.
Okay. Thank you. Anissa Levy, I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given to me is the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now proceed with questions from the opposition and crossbench till 5:15, and if time needed, the government has the last 15 minutes. So we'll throw to the opposition.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister and officials for joining us. Look, I wanted to start, Minister, with these reports that I'm sure you saw in The Australian. Headline, Dominic Perrottet to bail out of Water New South Wales projects, Guardian, New South Wales dam projects in doubt amid cost blowouts and environmental concerns. So can you give us clarity about the Dungowan, Mole River and Wyangla projects? What is happening with them?
I thank you for the opportunity to address those media reports, Ms Jackson, and also acknowledge the contribution by the Premier yesterday at his budget estimates, where he reminded the committee yesterday that these final business cases for Wyangla and Dungowan have not yet come to ERC, and that is because we are finishing our work on those final business cases. And as you'd be aware, Ms Jackson, in terms of Mole River, it's a strategic business case to see whether we take the next step on that dam. And so for that very reason, there has been no decision reached, but we are committed to those projects. And we need...
Are you though? Because literally these articles seem pretty... You know, there's some pretty serious suggestion in here from within Water New South Wales that you're not committed to them. So this is completely wrong. This hasn't come from nowhere. This is completely wrong.
I don't think the suggestions have come from Water New South Wales. I think that the suggestions are unfair in that the final business cases haven't been completed, but it is also fair, which I think some of the article in the Australian highlighted, that there are some cost pressures from the original commitments that we made, that we've talked to publicly in the past 12 months. But I will say that it has been an extraordinary turnaround in the past 12 months in the water outlook across New South Wales. Many thought it would never rain again, and sometimes, as I was the new water minister for the first 2 years, I never thought it was going to rain again. But it has shown, it has rained again. We are in a La Nina period after a very severe El Nino, which saw some of the most dreadful infalls into the Northern Basin that we've ever seen in the history of record keeping in New South Wales. So we have some challenges with climate change, with what we are going to deal with as a society. We often talk about the harder, greater droughts, but I also need to reflect that during that same period we're going to have deeper, more sustained storm activity. We've seen that over the past few weeks, and we have some pretty serious Bureau of Meteorology predictions for this weekend. So, we are going to be challenged with water. And at the heart of managing water into the future with climate change, I believe, is more capacity for storage. And that is why our final business cases, they have taken a little longer than we first predicted. We've set up a new unit within Department of Industry Water Infrastructure. Already we've working and got projects out the door worth about $500 million. So, and that is headed by our witness, Anissa Levy. It is a big job. We haven't built dams. We haven't built big dams in New South Wales for a very long time.
According to this, you're not going to build dams. Construction of a dam along the Mole River is earmarked not to go ahead. According to officials familiar with the matter, the Wyangla Dam is likely to be, quote, indefinitely postponed. So people in these communities are reading these reports, multiple reports this week in the newspaper, and you can't give any certainty at all about whether there's any accuracy in this.
I think that's a really fair question, and I don't like what this uncertainty is doing to those communities. We've had hundreds of engagement sessions throughout the Lachlan Valley. We have 70% support for the raising of the wall at Wyangla, which will give another 650 gigalitres of water, which when we had, through the drought, our water levels at 9%, putting the town water supplies of Cowra, Condobolin and Forbes at risk. I don't like that these headlines are creating this fear, coupled with celebrations from Helen Dalton, representing the Shooters and Fishers Party, joining with Kate Fairman, also putting out into the community that there is going to be no dams. We've won, we've won, we've won. Well, I don't think you've won. We are still doing our final business cases. We are still doing the work we need to do to do the appropriate expenditure of taxpayer dollars. But I can tell you I'm committed to those projects. There is funding set aside for the projects, Dungowan and Wyangla. Mole River, it was just funding for the strategic business case. But we need to investigate greater water security across this great state, whether it's in the Sydney Basin and whether it's in the inland. So water storage is very much at the heart of ensuring that we have the supply that we need into the future, with the inevitability of climate change predictions of greater droughts, but also greater storms.
Can you at least give us then a sense of the time frame on these business cases? Because as you say, they've been delayed. People are now reading multiple reports that run quite counter to the evidence that you're giving us here today. When are those business cases going to proceed to ERC?
I hope in the next few months, and I don't want to put a timetable on it, but I do hope in the next few months, and we will do that work and continue to do what we need to do within government. They are considerable investments. There has been allocations put aside, the Snowy Hydro 2.0 funds that we secured from the sale of Snowy Hydro 2.0 to the Commonwealth. There is funding. the news article does refer to areas of cost that that have escalated in relation to biodiversity offsets, and we will work through those issues and those problems. And I have spoken to the Deputy Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, and his predecessor, Michael McCormack. Our federal government is also committed to those projects.
I just want to ask about that, because you mentioned the costs. It's in the article, and in fact the Premier's evidence yesterday, as you acknowledged, he was very open about some of those increased costs. So has the federal government provided an assurance that if the cost does increase, they will continue to provide 50% of the funding for the projects, or does New South Wales bear all of the risk if the costs increase?
We're working through those costings with the federal government, and our expectation would be we'd hope that they reach 50%
If they don't,
the
though,
total
you seem
costs.
to be very committed to proceeding, so yep, sure. I mean, I hope they're listening today, and, you know, Deputy Prime Minister, you know, you can hear the Minister wants you to cough up, but if they don't, are we going to end up paying all the difference?
Ms Jackson, I don't like to deal in the world of hypotheticals. We'll deal in the world of negotiations.
We know the costs are going to increase. You've acknowledged, the Premier himself has acknowledged that on the record yesterday. We don't have an assurance from the federal government that their contribution is going to increase. So it's not really hypothetical. There is a gap there. How is it going to be filled?
And we'll have those negotiations and discussions with the federal government as we present them the final business case.
The dams, as you know, were included as part of the critical needs water infrastructure legislation. Now that's about to expire. Does the fact that the projects have not commenced affect their status as critical state significant infrastructure, or will you need to re-legislate in order for them to continue to have that status?
In cooperation and coordination with the federal government, we do have a pathway of fast tracking and ensuring that we work together through our EIS processes at a federal and a state level, that they are given priority. And I might refer to Ms. Anissa Levy to discuss some of those conversations that we've had at a Commonwealth in terms of ensuring.
I'm not asking about your conversations with the Commonwealth. This is a state piece of legislation that scheduled these projects under our laws as critical water infrastructure. That piece of legislation is about to expire. These projects have not commenced. In fact, they have been delayed again. Does that affect their status under our law, and will you need to re-legislate in order to keep them as critical needs water infrastructure?
They are critical projects to the government. They have been, we have planning pathways that are ensuring that they have the priority and the attention they deserve.
So I'm taking this as a yes. You're not, you don't think you need, there's no question in your mind as to whether they continue to have that legal designation. It's not whether you think they're important. This is a legal designation.
I think it's important to appreciate that critical the infrastructure laws that we had put in place was in the middle of the drought, which gave us capacity, for example, where we were needing to construct urgent pipelines around Chaffey Dam, around Tamworth, which was a city that was under great stress. That was to ensure we could get into those projects in a really quick manner. That was the designation in the middle of the drought, having that critical state water infrastructure.
I appreciate that, but you specifically scheduled these projects under the Act, and I'm wondering whether you need to re-legislate if you wish to keep them in that status. Sorry, Ms Levy, sorry.
Sorry, Minister, may I jump in if that's all right with you? When the Water Supply Critical Needs Act expires in November, the projects will in default to being state significant infrastructure. It is then a matter for the Minister for Planning to determine if he would like to declare those projects as critical state significant infrastructure. We already have advice from the Department of Planning that they would automatically default to SSI, and that the the Secretary's Environmental Assessment requirements, the SEARs, for the projects would be the same, and we would continue along the same path to have these projects assessed. There will be no delay if the projects are assessed under SSI. However, it is the prerogative of the Minister for Planning to declare the project CSSI once the Water Supply Critical Needs Act expires.
Thank you, Ms Levy. That's really useful. That is happening on the 21st of November this year. Have you spoken to the Minister for Planning about this at all? Have you said to him, Rob, this is important to me? You know, are you going to do it?
We have spoken to his office.
Have you spoken to the Minister?
We are
Minister
having the
Pavey?
appropriate conversations that we need to have to meet our election commitments and what we want to do. It is incumbent on my team for us to finalise that final business case and go through the next stages. But I can guarantee to you that it is a priority and a commitment of our government to meet our election commitments and obligations. We will continue to work through those, and you know, if we need to go under the state significant legislation, we'll be having those conversations with Minister Stokes once we get through the final business case and ERC considerations.
Well, I mean, I appreciate they're important to you, Minister, and you've made that clear that they're priorities of yours. I mean, you've also made a range of other public comments, recently in relation to mistakes that you accept have been made in relation to water policy. Are you
also accept that those mistakes, and if you're referring to the Menindee Lakes projects and the savings, they're mistakes that I think that even the New South Wales Upper House, on your hearings out there, you've listened and you've spoken to the communities. You saw what happened in January 2019 when those lakes were dry after being full to the brim only 3 years earlier. I think it's a mistake. I think New South Wales is joined in the belief that it was a mistake, and even Vitesse, who did the report post the fish kills, said that the emptying out of the lakes in such a way did have a detrimental impact. We need to have those conversations as a state, and I'm happy to be having those, because I think the people certainly of Menindee and the Lower Darling appreciate those conversations need to be had, and I'll continue to have them, and the recommendations and the finding of your own upper house committees have highlighted that.
Sure, Minister, but you were the one that was on the front of the Daily Telegraph saying that the New South Wales government, after 10 years in government, had stuffed up water policy.
No, I didn't say that at all. That is a really unfair, outrageous thing to say.
It was literally in the headline, Minister.
I don't write the headlines, Ms Jackson. As you would know, you have a long experience with the media. I don't write the headlines. And if you look at my commentary and my comments in that article,
the headline
I highlighted.
I will take a point of order now.
I highlighted.
About to clarify.
Sorry, Ms Jackson. Sorry, there is a point of order.
The point of order is the Minister's trying to clarify what was said. I'd like to hear the answer.
Thank you. The Minister has the...
The issue was a decision was made in 2012 that was put to government by Tony Burke that we had to find 106 gigalitres of savings at the Menindee Lakes to go towards our sustainable diversion limit. Now, it became very clear over time that was an unrealistic saving and was going to have a detrimental impact to the cultural perspectives of that community, as well as the tourism and the recreation. It's the lifeblood, it's the tourism, it's the recreation for the people of Broken Hill. And to be, and what we saw smack bang in the middle of our faces in 2019 in the January was a policy that was just not going to work. So I had an obligation to call that out, because our agencies had spent many millions of dollars, Murray-Darling Basin Authority, as well as our own people and our own agencies, enormous amounts of time trying to consult with a community that was telling us this isn't on.
I don't necessarily disagree with you in terms of your assessment, but this is a decision that was made in 2012. As you say, in 2019, it becomes as obvious as it possibly can. It's now 2021. You were the one that after 10 years in government said, we finally realised we have to start consulting with the community on water policy. Will you apologise to those communities who have been trying to have their voices heard for almost 10 years now, when we finally have an acknowledgement that you stuffed it up?
I'm happy to acknowledge for the people out there that governments of all persuasions haven't been listening properly, and we're resetting it.
That is a good acknowledgement. Will you be in a position to deliver that into the next election? Are you going to stay the Water Minister to March 2023?
That's not my decision to make, and I hope that I do, because I love this portfolio. I love the work that we're doing. I love the way we're changing the narrative. I love the way that we are actually getting better environmental outcomes through the Murray-Darling Basin. I love the fact that I got $330 million out of the MDBA to help in water security and water, river overflows around Deniliquin and Narrandera that we inspected the other day. I love the work that I'm doing with the Federal Minister Keith Pitt to ensure our voices and our communities have a voice that they deserve. And I love the work that I'm doing with Victoria in a government of another political persuasion, ensuring that the Murray-Darling Basin Plan actually listens to communities and has the respect again of communities, because it had lost that respect, and we need to get it back, because we can do good work, we can improve river health, we can continue to support our communities in the way they deserve.
Have you had a conversation with the new Premier or Deputy Premier about continuing in the water portfolio?
I have many conversations with all members of government and of cabinet, and I'm not going to reveal those conversations, all of those conversations with you, Ms Jackson, with the greatest of respect.
That's fair enough. I probably wouldn't either. When is the next Ministerial Council meeting on water?
I think it's May next year. Is that right, Jim?
The date hasn't firmly been set, but it'll be something around that.
The reason I ask is because you've talked a little bit of your language there has been about reset, new direction, that sort of thing. My understanding is that positions in relation to things like the management of the waterways of the Murray-Darling Basin are discussed at Ministerial Council meetings, are subject to Cabinet approval. So is this reset, new direction that you are talking about, is that something that has been approved by Cabinet, or is that just your personal opinion or personal view?
One of the areas, I've had the support of the New South Wales government to get the best outcomes for New South Wales at all times. And with respect, I've also had conversations with other basin states to say, essentially, there's $4 billion in funding to improve infrastructure and river health and outcomes. Let's try and make this conversation about better environmental outcomes, not just a water target. We can deliver more water, but if we give the power to our communities to develop better options, like we saw in Deniliquin the other week, where you have a farmer using water through the irrigation channels on his property to feed into his own wetland, land he's sacrificing for better native fish habitat, then that's the type of change we can make. And that is the big conversation where the Murray-Darling Basin Authority wants a lot of change in respect to constraints. Constraints scare a lot of farmers, but if you can start showing how you can do that, working with farmers, giving them better bridge and bridge access on their own properties so you don't impact their ability to farm their land, but also at the same time allow overflow events to happen, we can actually achieve all the things that we need to do. I mean, one of the great things that I want to do with the reimagining of Menindee Lakes and the savings there is also to get rid of the concrete fixed crest weirs so that we can have the native fish be able to go up and down our riverways in a better way. We are, in detailed design work and EIS for the new Wilcannia weir, which is going to give that community not just 4 months of water, but up to 16 months of water. And we want to do the same work in Coloranabri and Burke in that way. And also, I'm proud of the work I've done engaging with the environment agencies on Tooral Station. We bought Tooral Station in 2012, Penny Wong did, for $23 million, yet barely a moment of water has gone over from Tooral, and to ensure the connectivity of the Darling. That's a big conversation our communities need to have. There's much we can do if we can do it together, be respectful of what the communities are putting forward, and that's what I'm very proud to be working on with all basin states, including South Australia.
Thank you. Ms Hurst.
Thank you. Minister, in previous estimate hearings, I've asked you about the terrible situation of wombat mange in Bundeela Recreation Area. The last time that we spoke, you said that the Brevecto trial was going to be underway in April, May this year. Can you give an update on this trial and if it's been further affected by lockdowns?
I understand it has, with the professor or the scientists working on it from Tasmania, but I'm just surface dwelling here. Emma, I'm going to pass over to Andrew George, who is right across this issue, and be sure I made sure he was for today's budget estimates for you.
Thank you.
But I'm sure he was anyway.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Emma. Yes, those trials were impacted by COVID, obviously. Earlier this year, we were able to complete the groundwork that we had committed to do with the University of Tasmania to understand those baseline surveys. The University of Tasmania, though, has reached an agreement with Sydney University to enable some work to commence this year. I understand some of those trials will be commencing in the next month, or if not later this month. But certainly the program will be starting in earnest now this year and moving into next year for the 3-year program.
Thank you. As I understand it, I mean, obviously I understand that there would be delays, but I'm wondering if there's been any interim measures to at least treat some of these wombats, given the amount of suffering that they would be experiencing while there's these delays going on the trial?
No treatment to date, as I understand it. Further baseline surveys, though. So, in undertaking those surveys, which were undertaken in December last year, as well as April, May, and June this year, we did come across 4 wombats that had mange. I understand one of those wombats was euthanised during that inspection, but no treatments were made during that period, as I understand it. That program will commence, however, this month with that partnership between the University of Tasmania and Sydney University.
Will the populations need to be reassessed? I'm assuming that there could be a significant number of wombats in this period that have actually died from the mange. Will that affect the trial and research, or is there a plan to reassess the numbers of wombats in the area?
Well, one of the findings from the University of Tasmania was that they generally observed that there's actually a large and healthy wombat population at Bendila, with a small number with mange. It also needs to be recognised, obviously, that the land we manage at Bendila does neighbour other land where wombats are present, and which treatment is not necessarily able to be done directly. So the treatment program that is being implemented will be using Brevector, which has a greater chance of improving the health and the condition of those wombats.
So, sorry, I mean, I understand that there would obviously be a healthy population, but I assume they wouldn't be part of the trial. The question was really in regards to the wombats that were originally going to be treated as part of this trial. Many of them may have died. Are you expecting the same number of wombats to still be affected with mange now as when this was originally planned to have been undertaken?
Well, look, that's my understanding, but I can certainly take that on notice and check that with the University of Tasmania.
And I assume the Bunditla recreational area will be opening up over the summer holidays. Will that create further delays?
It will be opening up. It is open now, but no, it won't be causing any delays.
And will you be releasing any preliminary findings from the research trial to the public? And if so, when would we expect to see that?
Certainly, we're happy to make that information publicly available, particularly for the use of the wildlife bodies that will be working with us in an ongoing fashion to look after that wombat population. So I don't have at hand the timeframes for providing that information or when it will be complete. But again, I can take that on notice.
If you can take it on notice, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. Minister, last month it was reported that the New South Wales Government has been dropping 1080 baits within the Warragamba Special Area, which is part of Sydney's main drinking water catchment. In 2007, a New Zealand study found that there were major gaps in knowledge around the long-term impacts of human health due to chronic low dose of 1080 exposure. Has Water New South Wales looked into the risk of potential 1080 microdosing in Sydney's water supply?
I'm not aware of what studies or what they've followed. Can I ask Mr. George, are you in a position to be able to add some more detail to that? And given that we had 250,000 hectares around Warragamba Dam damaged during the bushfires, the environmental recovery of that area has been challenged, and I'm sure this has something to do with some of those issues. Mr. George?
Yeah, thank you, Minister. And yes, certainly can answer this question. To the comment on the area, we do manage.
So I only really want to know about whether if the New South Wales Water has actually looked into the risk of potential 1080 microdosing in Sydney's water supply. I'm not interested in why the 1080 is being used. Just to clarify.
Yes, risk assessments are undertaken in conjunction with National Parks and Wildlife, who are also responsible for managing that land as well. And those risk assessments concluded that it is actually a low risk, noting also that the reduced concentrations that are used in restricting baiting in areas away from waterways, and also noting the high rate of decay of 1080 in the environment.
And will there be continual monitoring to ensure that water contamination from 1080 doesn't occur?
So obviously we undertake quite a comprehensive water quality monitoring program in the declared catchments, but there is no specific test for 1080 itself within the waterways.
There is something like 70 technical tests during a water filtration process. There is a lot of testing done of Sydney's water at any one time, but be assured the water quality we have here, despite the challenges that we've had recently of drought and fires, is very strong and well monitored.
Yeah, I'll just throw to Ms Fairman.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Minister. Just wanted to... You mentioned before the fact that the department's undertaking, I think, or looking at getting a strategic business case done for Mole River Dam. Has a strategic business case been done for Wayangala and Dungowan?
That's the first part of those processes, and the next page is the final business case, and that's what we're working on those two at the moment.
Yeah, but a strategic business case hasn't been done for Wayangala Dam?
Yes.
It has been done?
Strategic is first and then final.
So just to be clear, so a strategic business case has been done for Wayangala Dam. Has that been released publicly?
I'm not sure of its release. No.
Dungowan Dam, a strategic business case has been done for that as well. So Treasury officials the other day, when I asked about this, did say that the strategic business case, one of the purposes of doing those is to investigate all options and put all options on the table. Did that happen with Wayangala Dam in that strategic business case and Dungowan Dam? Were other options considered other than a dam?
Yes, as part of those processes, other options are considered through the strategic and the final business cases.
So non-dam alternatives have been considered as part of the strategic business case.
I know they are as part of the final business case, but I might take advice. Anissa?
Yeah, thanks, Minister. We have broadened work that's been done subsequent to the strategic business case to include a much broader range of options in the assessment that we're completing for the final business case, considering both a range of alternative infrastructure and non-infrastructure options, which are being documented as part of the completion of the final business case.
Okay, all right. I think that's good to hear. I just wanted to just ask some questions about the Macquarie Floodplain Management Plan. I understand that the final version of this was gazetted on the 20th of September this year. There's a discrepancy, however, of I've been given a figure of 73,600 hectares of mapped area protected by flood works between the draft Macquarie Floodplain Management Plan of 2018 and the final one of 2021. So in other words, so the one in the draft Floodplain Management Plan of 2018 had 106,200 hectares of protected areas in terms of flood works, but the final one only mapped 32,000 72,600 hectares of area protected by approved or authorised flood works. I just wanted to know what's the process for sorting out the unauthorised 73,600 hectares in the Macquarie Floodplain Management Plan. What happens now?
I'm going to go to Mr. Bentley just to talk about that, but I suspect we're going to have to take this one on notice, Kate.
Yeah, we'll have to take the detail of that on notice. It may well come through while we're in here this afternoon, in which case we'll share it.
Okay, so this goes further then into the fact that, okay, I'll take a step back. Who's on the Healthy Floodplains Review Committee? What's the membership of that committee?
There are 4 members. There's an independent chair. There's a representative of NCC. There's a representative of
Nature Conservation Council for Hansard.
And the New South Wales Irrigator Council, and a representative of New South Wales Farmers.
And does the independent chair, are they independent of all interests and have to declare that in terms of being independent?
Indeed, and the probity checks into how decision making has been made has just been finalised and published, and has cleared the decision making processes through that committee.
And so that review committee, I understand, has been, firstly, everybody on there has to sign a confidentiality agreement. Is that correct? So they can't disclose anything that happens within that committee to anyone?
I would expect that to be the case.
You'd know that, surely, Dr. Bentley.
I imagine that's the case. Off the top of my head, I don't 100% know. I don't want to mislead you, but I will confirm. But it's not a point of detail I had in my head, but I expect that's the case.
So the purpose of that committee was to do what?
It's not to set policy, it's to ensure that policy is being applied appropriately. So people can, if people disagree, if individual users disagree with the assessment of the department, it can be put to that committee so that the committee can assess whether the policy is appropriately being applied.
When you're saying the policy being applied, can you expand on what that means, Minister? You're aware of this committee and what it does?
Yes, with many other committees that are in the purview of my agency. But what's your question, Kate?
So when Dr. Bentley says that it's in relation to the policy being applied, that's what the committee does. What does that mean in practice?
Policy decisions. If we make a decision in a water sharing plan to ensure if someone raises a concern, that is the committee in relation to floodplain management that could assess that. So you have stakeholders available to assess in a genuine way what may be of concern or may be raised.
So the committee looks at things like, I mean, part of the complexity of this is trying to understand what volume of floodplain harvesting occurred when limits were set, or when limits were set, what volume of harvesting was occurring, and you have to use various techniques to work out.
Was it my understanding, just to kind of simplify it for you, just to whether this is correct or not, that NRA has gone on to a range of different properties, say, for example, in the Guida or Border Rivers, they go on as well as DPI officials, working out flood works, basically assessing flood works to be approved in terms of, say, the scale or quantity. Landholders get a kind of letter saying this is what you know we have assessed on your property, and then if landholders or irrigators want to challenge that, they go to this committee.
Mr. Barnes may just have to confirm whether NRA actually has a role in that which is brought to the committee, or whether that's more of a compliance function. Grant, do you have a response to that?
Thank you, Dr. Bentley. For a few years, some NRA staff were working within the Healthy Waterways project that's administered by the department. Those staff undertook inspections on farm to determine the eligibility of flood works for the purpose of floodplain harvesting. They recorded details, they mapped those works. They also interviewed irrigators about floodplain harvesting practices, and that information from the interviews we used to build the modelling. Our work is now ceased in that regard, and we await changes in the policy settings before coming back with any compliance and enforcement actions that are required of us.
You mean like licensing floodplain harvesting?
I think that's right, Minister.
Ask the question.
Nice try, Minister. I will now throw to Mr. Latham on WebEx.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, and thank you, officials. Minister, in September 2015, Sydney Water commented on the Sydney Science Park rezoning proposal at Luddenham, and it said the subject site is a proponent sequence at no cost to government planning proposal. And they said that to go ahead, the proponent had to show that the servicing of the project will be at no cost to the New South Wales government, including Sydney Water. Why then, Minister, in December last year with Minister Ayres, did you announce a funding deal for water facilities at the Sydney Science Park that was described to your office by Vernon Jackson of Sydney Water as, and I quote, Sydney Water is investing around $200 million over the next 30 years to build an integrated water cycle system and associated infrastructure at Sydney Science Park?
Mr. Latham, that much has changed, I'm sure, between 2015 and 2021 in terms of delivering water in a holistic way to the growth areas of Sydney. As you know, there is a plan for 7 million trees to be planted in the new parts of Sydney so that we keep it cool, and that's going to require a lot of water. Now, I have watched with interest and some concern your questions in relation to this issue and sought advice from Dr. Bentley, and I'm going to seek the input of Rox Shearer, the Managing Director of Sydney Water, to answer some of the specifics concerns that you have surrounding this issue. There is investment by all parties in this project, and I get a very strong sense that you are concerned about some probity in some areas of this, and I'm going to have Mr. Shearer deal with this. As you know, Sydney Water is a SOC and is independently managed, and I will have Mr. Shearer answer the more detailed questions that I'm expecting from you, Mr. Latham.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Perhaps on notice, Mr. Shearer, the terms, conditions and monetary amounts of the Sydney Science Park funding?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I don't need to do this on notice, but I'm after the terms, conditions and monetary amounts of the Sydney Science Park funding from Sydney Water.
Yeah, this is something I can take on notice. Just to answer to your question about the change of position, back in 2016, the area was rezoned by Penrith Council, and that was B4 and B7 zones for employment, education, and residential and retail. And following that, in May 2017, the Western Sydney Airport construction was announced, and that's what technically changed the situation for the Sydney Science Park.
But it's still an out-of-sequence development. It's a long way from the airport site, and there's no contiguous urban or industrial development out there. As the Minister will tell you from the two visits. They're dusty open fields. Isn't that true?
So what happens in this sort of situation is very standard, and this is something that is completely explained very transparently on our website. When this sort of developments happen, we will ask the developers to contribute for the part of the development that is in advance of the rest of the development in the area. So we would be, obviously, at the end of the day, when everything will be constructed, we would reimburse the developers from this investment. But at the start, we would not take the risk for a development that is far from the rest of the developed area. And we would ask the developer to pre-fund the construction. And this is exactly what happened in that case. Where Celestino pre-funded the construction that is currently ongoing.
In May 2019, Sydney Water employed Chris Gant as its head of city growth and development. Mr Gant's previous job was as Celestino's development manager. Was he involved at all in putting together this funding deal announced at the end of last year?
Not at all. Mr Gant was, yes, employed in May 2019, and as it is the case for all the employees that are in that situation, there is always a conflict of interest management plan that is put in place, and that's one of the policy that we have inside the business. So a conflict of interest management plan is put in place, and the person is not associated at all with any business, any transaction with their former employer. So Mr. Gant was absolutely not involved in the discussion with Celestino.
But under normal, in his job as head of city growth and development, would he have been involved in this growth and development proposal at Sydney Science Park?
Not completely. That would be another business unit, and it has been the case where another business unit for this sort of transaction would be involved.
So Mr Gant declared a written conflict of interest, and his manager ensured that he had no involvement in this Celestino funding deal.
Absolutely, and this is something that we have double-checked following your allegations, and it's been double-checked by the audit department, and this is confirmed. The documents have been produced, and evidence have been produced that he was not involved in any of the discussion.
Thank you. I'll throw to the opposition. Sorry, Mr Latham, your time is... Mr Latham, sorry, your time has elapsed. I realise that people can't hear the bell on WebEx, so I'll throw to the opposition.
Thanks. I want to just ask Mr Shearer first. I understand that Sydney Water recently met with builders in southwestern Sydney, specifically around Austral, to indicate that no more sewerage or stormwater facilities could come online until maybe 2022 or 2023 in those growth suburbs. Is that correct?
That's not exactly correct. We have discussion with developers and local council in the Austral area. We have had this discussion for a long time. The discussion that we have is about building the interim stage 1 of Australian Leppington, and the discussion that we currently have is about the timing of the delivery of this stage of construction. The discussion that we have had with the developers was about the fact that the procurement of the construction activity for this stage of development has come out with a price that was exceeding the price that we had in our budget, and we needed a few weeks to assess our position on the situation, on the best option to move forward, and this may have an impact of a 3 to 6 months delay of the construction delivery.
So there will be a delay. At the moment, you think it will be in the order of 3 to 6 months only?
That's our estimation at the moment, and we are currently assessing the position following the outcome of this procurement phase.
And how long is that going to take?
I would expect that to take a few weeks.
As you would presumably be aware, council can't issue any DAs until this matter is resolved if they don't know whether stormwater and sewerage facilities will be available to be provided by Sydney Water, or when they will be provided, or when they may be available.
Absolutely, and that's why we're keeping a very, very close contact with the developers and the local councils. And what we are discussing is the possibility to provide some flexibility on what we call Section 73, which would give the developers the possibility to start construction, to get their DA and start construction before the wastewater infrastructure is in place. So this is the discussions that we have ongoing, because we don't want to delay the development of the...
Well, I mean, I'm sure you don't want to. I mean, I understand it's not intentional, but Minister, this land was rezoned in 2013-14. Builders have taken deposits from local families. This is the growth area of Sydney, out in southwest Sydney, and now Sydney Water has come in and said, well, there's a delay of potentially 3 to 6 months, depending on how their conversation about the procurement process goes more. How has this been allowed to happen, considering the land rezoning was almost a decade ago? And we know that's where growth is occurring.
One of the challenges we have with growth is that we have targets set with councils, and some councils are meeting that demand and others aren't. And getting that absolute carriage of construction perfect is a challenge. And we've just heard from Mr. Shearer that we're working through that. And Ms. Kirsten Fishburn, I think we'll have some important information here to add, just in terms of the government's energy around, getting that pathway right. And I'll hand to you.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I can assure everyone I'm deeply familiar with the issues of Austral as the ex-Council General Manager. The example of Austral is one that I regularly use to talk about the challenges in making sure that housing supply and infrastructure are aligned. This is not the fault of Sydney Water. Sydney Water know what they need to do and have been planning for this for the future. There's been a number of what I really think in the case of Austral are perfect storms that have contributed to the position we're currently in now. Lot sizes were changed so that there is a greater push to get residential into the Austral area. I think Liverpool Council changed their lot sizes, if I remember correctly, in 2016, and that obviously has an impact. Then, of course, we've had the situation that I think I discussed at the Minister for Planning's budget estimates, where their demand for residential subdivision in Greenfields area has completely outstripped anybody's predictions. It really has come about as a consequence of COVID and the fact that people don't need to commute in every single day. So that particular housing typology has become quite attractive at this point in time. So you've got greater demand than anticipated in terms of buying pattern, greater demand than anticipated in terms of the original lot layout that everybody planned towards, and then, of course, a need to align the infrastructure there. This is frankly a challenge. I'm sure I spoke about it with Minister Stokes as well. It doesn't just happen in Austral, it's always a challenge in Greenfields areas, and wearing the planning part of my department's hat, there has been a lot of work that's been going on to try and make sure we do better infrastructure alignment with housing release, including working exceptionally collaboratively with Sydney Water through the Planning Delivery Unit area, my old baby, to establish a Greenfields Coordination Committee so that we make sure we do get these type of things right. Because I understand the frustrations of the developers in Austral. I probably was the loudest voice to Sydney Water about this less than 2 years ago. But I do think there has been a confluence of factors that have led to this particular issue as well.
I mean, I'm sure that's true, but Minister, the land was rezoned in 2013-14. As Ms Fishburn said, the lot sizes were changed in 2016. Again, that's 5 years ago. I mean, surely it's not news to the government that families are buying houses and that there's growth out in southwestern Sydney. That's not something that's just crept up on anyone. And now these families who have paid deposits for their dream house, finally trying to get into the market, are being told no, delays. You can't, there's no sewerage. Sydney Water's hit capacity, hit the wall. I mean, that's not an acceptable situation, is it, Minister?
Sydney Water hasn't hit the wall or capacity. We have $5.5 billion worth of infrastructure work planned over the next 4 years to deal with growth and where we need to maintain, fix and grow our infrastructure, like Kemps Creek and our sewage facilities there. But I think Ms Fishburn has hit the nail on the head. This was the predictions around the growth out there were not accurate.
Well, are you at least confident that you've got your modelling better now? Because we don't want this situation occurring again. If predictions weren't accurate, has that been resolved?
I'll deal, Ms Fishburn will deal with planning modelling.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I do feel a lot more confident. We have a number of other factors available now to help us understand the pattern of Greenfield's development and delivery of infrastructure. We have the Urban Development Program, which gives real-time data about land rezoning, DA under assessment, DA completion and OC. So we're able to actually use that to look at where there might be a spike in interest that we hadn't predicted, and therefore work to get towards just in time. We've also got significantly better cross-government relationships to try and manage these things. I mentioned the Greenfields Coordination Committee. That's not the only one. There's also a cross-government Erytropolis Committee as well. So we're getting the right people in the room to have these discussions to make sure it's not just water, it's other forms of infrastructure as well. It's your energy providers, it's 5G infrastructure, making sure that we're really planning this out rigorously and using what is fairly new to government, that level of data, using actual data analytics rather than apocryphal development statements to really look at what's happening, what are the underlying tensions and what are the underlying opportunities in our Greenfields areas.
And one of the other things that is occurring out in southwestern Sydney, Minister, is people who already have properties there. I mean, this is particularly in the case of areas around Camden, for example, where they were basically living in sort of semi-rural areas. The growth has come in around them. They previously had, you know, septic or other sort of sewerage systems. Sydney Water's come in with the suburb, and they've been told to connect to the sewerage, which I would consider to be a pretty basic right if you're living in the city. It's going to cost you up to $80,000 per property. Is that acceptable to you, that pensioners are being charged $80,000 to access sewerage?
I'd need to see the details of those invoices, because this is an issue that also happens in the country, and I've never seen an invoice or a cost around that figure. There is connection charges and there's benefits when you do get onto the mains, rather than having to have someone come and empty sewer out every 12 months, and the danger is a lot of people don't do that, and that has a detrimental impact on environment, riverways, groundwater, etc.
Well, they're much less likely to do it if it's going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars.
And I'd like to see the details of that. I mean, Mr. Shearer, I'm sure that we're not individually billing customers $80,000.
Mr. Shearer, people in Spring Farms were quoted at up to $80,000 to connect their property to the sewerage. Is that acceptable to you?
Well, that's something I would like to take on notice. I'm surprised. There is always very strict rules about development and new development. When a new area is developed, the connection will be provided, and the cost that the customers would have to bear will be the cost inside their property. In areas where this is a basically remote connection, where it's not part of a developed area, and a village or small area would like to connect to our network. In that case, they will need to fund the connection to the network. So I would like to see the number and the area that you're quoting here, so that I can exactly respond to your question.
It just seems, though, I mean, even in that latter example that you gave, where people in, sort of smaller villages or smaller areas on the orbital might want to connect, my understanding is that's not the case here. But even where that is the case, we have a situation where people just want, these are people who are living in southwestern Sydney, they want to be connected to sewerage. I mean, this is something that was rolled out in the 70s. Premier Rand, Prime Minister Whitlam, basic right. Sydney Water is giving hundreds of millions of dollars to some people out who are doing development in southwestern Sydney, yet charging pensioners $20, $30, $40, up to $80,000 to get connected to sewerage. Does that seem like the right priorities to you?
The rule is exactly the same for all our customers.
Well, the rule's unfair.
Well, the fact is that the connection to the network is or the growth and the money that we invest into the development is paid by all our customers. And therefore, that's why we have a situation where when the city grows, Sydney Water and the entire customer base paying for developments. But the people that have decided at some point to live far away from the developed area and that have built their own water and sewage system, so not connected to the Sydney Water network, they will have to wait for the rest of the development of the city to be able to connect at no cost. But if they want to connect ahead of growth, then they would have to fund the development themselves.
Minister, I just wanted to ask a couple of quick questions about the Chair of Water New South Wales. I understand that when the Anne McDonald, I think it was, resigned this year, so Kay Dalton has been appointed as an interim chair.
No relation to Helen.
In the consideration of how you were going to proceed with that, were there any other candidates, alternative candidates, considered for Chair of Water New South Wales after Ms McDonald resigned?
I'm not aware of the details of other candidates. I'm, whilst Minister for Water, the shareholder ministers are responsible for board appointments as the Finance Minister and the Treasurer, so you'd need to maybe put those questions on.
Did you not propose Mark Vaile as a potential Chair of Water New South Wales?
I didn't propose Mark Vaile, no.
You did not raise the possibility that Mark Vaile would be a suitable Chair of Water New South Wales with anyone?
I didn't raise Mark Vaile at all.
Okay. Wanted to ask Mr George, I think, a quick question just in relation to let me start again. When the drought broke in early 2020, I understand there was a conversation about whether the lifting of water restrictions, and I think Water New South Wales suggested that because of potential contamination after the bushfires, that it might be advisable to continue water restrictions for some time in early 2020. Is that correct, Mr George?
I don't recall the specifics of the discussion that you're referring to, no.
Perhaps someone else might be able to assist. Mr Bentley.
True
Dr Bentley, excuse me.
That's fine. It's certainly true that restrictions were kept in place because of concerns following drought, bushfire, heavy rain. So restrictions were kept in place, not based on how much water is in the dam, but...
No, absolutely, yes, absolutely, because... the ash and et cetera had sort of run into the dam, and so, yeah.
Which led to our decision also to keep the desal operating so that there was another water source in case things got complicated.
In the process, yeah. Apologies, Minister. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's quite a serious issue and one that I've got to commend my agencies for managing. There was really big concerns with the damage from the ash and the debris from that 250,000 hectares around, and I've got to say the team led by Mr George and Mr Shearer and our own agencies were concerned, and it's one of those things. They managed it well, and we got through it.
Minister, did senior members of the government suggest that it would be preferable to them not to continue with water restrictions in those contexts because they wanted water use to increase, because this provided more dividends via Sydney Water?
That was never a conversation I had with any member.
You don't recall the former Premier Berejiklian suggesting that perhaps it would be better to lift water restrictions at that time so that water
We never
increase.
had a conversation or requested.
You don't recall anyone from her office suggesting an alternative approach to that was adopted to continue water restrictions at that time?
I think, to be fair, there became a point that that we needed, that the dam had moved so quickly, and we got down to 42%. It was a very difficult situation. Never got as low as the Millennium Drought in 2007, and just some very good questions from Kate Pham in the last few budget estimates. Our water use in Sydney has gone from, on average, 220 litres per person down to 180 litres per person, and Dr. Bentley is obsessed with fixing leaks, and we bring down the leaks across the system to a very good level. I think we'd been through quite a challenging period.
I don't really need the history of water restrictions. I'm asking specifically about conversations that occurred in early 2020 when there was a discussion, the drought had broken, but the bushfires had occurred, about what was happening with water restrictions. Did the former Premier or anyone from her office suggest that perhaps it would be preferable to lift water restrictions because that meant more water would be used and that would improve the bottom line at Sydney Water?
No, that was never a premise ever put forward to me by the Premier, and I'm not always, I would speak to her about those issues. I'm not sure, and I can't speak for any of her staff, but that is certainly not the sort of order that would come from the Premier's office.
Not an order, but a contribution to the conversation that was occurring in relation to water restrictions at that time.
Nothing was ever discussed with me or in my knowledge that was in any way related to dividends. There were discussions, and rightly so, about how long should you keep restrictions in place, and it seems a bit strange to have storage levels suddenly way over 80% and yet you're restricting what people can do with water. I think those are very healthy, sensible conversations to have. The fact is Sydney Water decided to keep the desal plant running. That's within their purview. Between us, we decided restrictions should stay in place for quite some time, and that's about slowing the rate of water going through filters so that we don't have any treatment issues. So we managed that pretty well. But yes, of course, there were challenge about how long should you restrict what the public can do. Those conversations definitely had, and they should have had. They should have been held.
And the other part of that conversation is that we didn't want to forget all the good habits we just learned. And that was, that is very much to the point of being water wise, fixing leaks, putting whatever we can in our own properties and having good water habits to ensure the longevity of supply.
Mr. Shearer, was there any conversation that you were involved in at that time in early 2020 about Sydney Water's position on water restrictions and the relationship between the impact that water restrictions has on water use and the dividends that Sydney Water was providing to the New South Wales government?
Not at all.
Okay. Each might have a minute to ask his question.
Mr. Barnes, if I could very quickly, I'm quite fascinated by the use of drones in your compliance activity, or potential for drones to be a tool in the compliance of your agency. Are you using drones, and if so, is there a plan to increase the size of the drone fleet?
We use drones as part of our suite of intelligence tools. Drones allow us to cover territory in a short space of time, and when equipped with photographic technology, we're able to take account of the particulars of storages, dams on property, how water moves from the offtake around a farm and applied to crops. This information captured digitally forms a useful basis for our investigations. We have staff who are qualified as drone pilots, and we have a suite of drones that we deploy on a regular basis.
The bell went, but if you could just take that on notice, a bit about how many you've got and if there's a plan to increase the size of the fleet, that would be really good. Thanks, Mr. Barnes.
Thank you, Minister. Can I just turn to the non-urban water metering reforms? Has the telemetry system been fully integrated into the government agencies yet?
It's funny you should mention that. I was in a meeting yesterday with some landowners, and they were detailing with me some of the issues they're having with joining up that. It was actually getting the workforce out onto their properties in terms of the telemetry. Now, there's many different angles and facets of that question.
But specifically, has the telemetry been integrated with the New South Wales government agency system, so Water New South Wales? Can accounting and billing access it yet, or
Water New South Wales? Yeah, the data acquisition system, which was developed in the department, has been transferred to Water New South Wales, and we have protocols between us about how we use that. Not related to your question, not every meter is currently relaying its data to that system.
It's on the MACE 3 ones, yes.
Yeah, so the MACE meters, which are accurate and therefore under the policy don't need to be replaced, but do need to be telemetered to be fully compliant. We're still working through some remaining technical issues on those, and we expect to have that resolved in the first few months of next year.
Okay. So perhaps on notice, the ones that do need to be compliant by the 1st of December, can you give us an indication as to how many of them are connecting to the...
So for tranche 2?
Yes.
We'll take that on notice and come back to you. I can tell you tranche 1, 55% are fully compliant, which includes being connected to the system, and 90% of those tranche 1 now have an accurate meter in place, which is outstandingly good compared with where we were.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Minister, I might just turn to another matter. When did New South Wales Government approve a New South Wales water licence for a Chinese government-owned subsidiary called Unibal Proprietary Limited?
I'll take that on notice.
Okay. Was that something? Would that be something that would come across your desk, or that would be way down the food chain?
Well, I wouldn't say it's down the food chain.
Well, down the ladder. How far down the ladder would that go?
It wouldn't come across my desk, and it would be a matter for licensing is either applied by Water New South Wales or by NRA, depending on the type of licence application, but it'd be within those agencies.
Okay, so what sort of screening does the New South Wales government do in terms of vetting these foreign-owned or government-owned companies acquiring water licences?
Well, given that the water stays in Australia and that that it is part of the productive cycle, whether it's, I think the US is the largest water licence holder in Australia, not the Chinese, I think followed by the UK, then maybe Japan. But we export to the rest of the world, and we need to be able to, if a company has got through the federal government's gateways in terms of foreign ownership, I don't think my officials within Water New South Wales or in any part of our agencies would be looking at it saying, you know, that's not our purview in terms of foreign investment guidelines and review. That's the federal government.
Okay, so are you aware that the Foreign Investment Review Board's 2019 Register of Foreign Water Entitlements actually says that they do not screen for the purchase of water acquisitions? So it seems like you're putting it onto the feds. The feds are saying, well, we don't really do it. So no one really does it.
They manage the properties that are bought. But yes, there is a separation of licence and
property's been separated from water.
That's right. But generally, that water would be staying within New South Wales to be watering paddocks across New South Wales.
Okay, I might throw to, I don't think Mr Field's with us, I'll throw to Minister Pham.
Thank you. Justin is there if you wanted to.
Oh, Mr Field, can you hear us? I knew he was mobile, so I wasn't sure whether he was in reception. Mr Field.
I can, Chair. Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Chair and Minister?
Yes, Justin. Can you turn your radio up, though?
Good afternoon, Minister. How many of the 20 New South Wales water resource plans have been accredited by the Commonwealth?
We're in a very similar situation to all the other states. I think Victoria, South Australia, Queensland, our first draft has been sent back and we're going through the negotiations. I expect that will be done in the not too distant future.
Well, they were due to be accredited by 1 July 2019. They weren't submitted until between 9 April and 30 June 2020. The MDBA found all 20 were inconsistent with the requirements of the plan. Have any been resubmitted to the MDBA for accreditation?
We're going through those processes of negotiation, and as you understand too, Mr. Field, a lot of those issues that the Murray-Darling Basin Authority raised were matters of procedure and punctuation at times, and there were other issues as well, to be fair. We're working through those with the agencies working through those with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, but just like the other states, our first lot of plans were rejected, and we'll come back to them.
Have any been resubmitted to the
Not at this point.
accreditation?
Not at this point.
Chair, I'd like to, if I could, table the MDBA's comments on 8 of the water resource plans that were provided to the Minister between November 2020 and May 2021. I think the Secretariat's got the documents there. Minister, my simple analysis of these 8 responses by the MDBA, and I note they're extensive, some of the water resource plans, the comments run to plus 30 pages. It shows on average the resource plans only satisfactorily addressed about 50% of the requirements set out in the Murray-Darling Basin Plan. That's a pretty dismal effort, isn't it?
Just like the other states, this is part of the process and the negotiation. We're no different than the other states in having our first set of plans rejected. We'll continue to negotiate with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and the Federal Water Minister.
All of the other states have had all of their water resource plans accredited now, correct?
I'm not sure of the detail of that, but I do know that, like us, their first ones were rejected.
When will you submit all 20 for accreditation again?
In the foreseeable future.
Not prepared to put a date on it?
No, I'm not.
Minister, the NRC review of the Metropolitan Water Sharing Plan recommended that environmental flows in the Shoalhaven River, the environmental flow regime, be reviewed at some point in the near future. Your department has just put out a new metropolitan water strategy that suggests or proposes one of the options is to bring forward the transfer of water from the Shoalhaven system to Sydney, the Sydney system, from 75% of Sydney's catchment being full to 85%. That's a big take from the Shoalhaven system. Will you commit to the Shoalhaven residents that you will review, as per the recommendation of the NRC, environmental watering, the environmental watering rules of the Shoalhaven River?
I do recall, Mr. Field, that at the beginning of the drought, when we were, going into a situation, I'd just become minister, you started to raise some concerns and were quite misleading to the Shoalhaven community about the transfers and about the responsibilities of that water. I can guarantee the people of the Shoalhaven that we'll continue to do whatever we need to do to keep them in water. We will continue to do that in a thorough and proper way. I'm very proud of our Metropolitan Sydney Water Strategy, which encourages and has included for the first time conversations in Sydney and right across New South Wales, regional water strategies that will look at historic water flows and the needs of all communities. I can give the people of the Shoalhaven a guarantee we won't shortchange them, and I'm very alive to the fact that there are a lot of people in the Shoalhaven and the Illawarra that are very keen for future water infrastructure projects like a desalination plant to be built in the Illawarra around Wollongong, and we'll continue to do that work and ensure that the people of the Illawarra, the Shoalhaven and Sydney continue to have water into the future.
I think Mr. Field was trying to say something, but we couldn't hear him.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear him.
Oh, well, we should have been here.
Yeah, taking advantage of the online system. Good job, Minister. Is it the case, Minister, that whilst the Shoalhaven was on water restrictions during the last drought and Sydney wasn't, you were taking billions of litres from the Shoalhaven River and transferring it to Sydney, and you're now proposing to take yet more before you've done a review of the environmental needs of the Shoalhaven River?
I don't agree with your proposition. We'll always continue to ensure that water, and as soon as I became minister, we were on water restrictions. So that is a fact. I don't agree with your propositions. We will protect the people of the Shoalhaven and the Illawarra and all people through the Sydney catchment continue with water as we plan for future water supplies.
Will you do the review as recommended by the NRC of the environmental watering regime for the Shoalhaven River.
I'll take that on notice and seek some advice in relation to the timing of that. I've just been given by my official, Dr. Bentley, that the Greater Sydney Water Strategy proposes options for securing Sydney's water supply, including modifying environmental flows and transfers from the Shoalhaven catchment. We'll continue to do the work, and if the Natural Resource Commission have suggested we do some work, we'll do that as well, and feed that into our Sydney Water Regional Strategy.
And Minister Amanda Jones here, if I could jump in. We are consulting with the community and the Shoalhaven community in particular, as the NRC has recommended. The Greater Sydney water sharing plans are for review currently, and we're starting consultation early in the new year.
Thank you, Ms Jones. Minister, Sydney Water, in leaked documents, it was shown before that there'd be legislative change required before the Warragamba Dam could be operated as a flood mitigation dam, and Water New South Wales was seeking indemnity from liability should the management of the dam as a flood mitigation dam go wrong. Is it still the case that that dam cannot be operated as a flood mitigation dam until the legislation is changed?
That is the situation. It is not a flood mitigation dam. It is a water supply dam. That is why the government is exploring the options through Minister Ayres and Water New South Wales, raising Warragamba dam levels by 14 metres to give us the capacity for flood mitigation. We need the water in Warragamba for drinking supply. It is managed at a 1 metre below capacity so that we can maintain it. And we did do some work in the lead up to the end of last year in relation to canvassing those options. But given the need for the water that we have, that our intention is to keep operating as a water supply, not flood mitigation, but the work that Minister Ayres is doing with Water New South Wales in raising Warragamba Dam wall would then give the dam the capacity, if approved, the ability to become a flood mitigation dam to protect those in the Hawkesbury and Nepean and Blacktown areas.
Could I add, sorry, Mr. Could I just add...
Mr Bentley, beforehand, Minister, that wasn't what the document suggested. It suggested Water New South Wales was seeking an indemnity from liabilities that might include damage to downstream residents' properties as a result of negligence or problems in the operating of the dam. The suggestion here is the government seeking to indemnify themselves in case this goes horribly wrong. You're putting that risk on residents downstream, aren't you? That's what you're required to do to operate this dam as a flood mitigation dam. That's what the
law states. It must be operated as a water supply dam, not a flood mitigation dam. And I'm going to now refer to Dr. Bentley.
Thank you, Minister. Water New South Wales, we asked Water New South Wales and Sydney Water what would need to be done if we were to consider using the current Warragamba Dam for flood mitigation. Quite correctly, Water New South Wales drew our attention to their responsibilities and their legal obligations. Them asking for an indemnity does not mean what the government where the government would seek to cover itself, as it were. We were asking Water New South Wales, you as a state-owned corporation, what is your situation? When we did the modelling, it actually showed that in that last event, if we'd have operated the dam 5 metres below full supply level, it would have made a 0.6 metre difference to the level of the flood. So we concluded from that work, there's other stats I won't bore you with, but we concluded from that work, it's so immaterial, we'd have to drop the water supply level by 18% to just get a 0.6 metre difference. It was the right question for Water New South Wales to raise with us. We considered it in the business case and we rejected the business case, which was a unanimous decision of all the water sector leaders.
Thank you. I'll throw to Ms Fairman.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, I just want to go back to my previous line of questioning, which we just heard from Mr Barnes from NRA, that their staff had gone out and assessed flood supply works. Going back to the Healthy Floodplain Review Committee, so are you aware that the main task of that that committee was if landholders had an issue with the assessment done by NRA, they could appeal to this review committee with a representative of NCC, representative of New South Wales farmers, representative of New South Wales irrigators and a chair. They could appeal to that committee and have the whole thing reviewed and a decision made. Are you aware that that was the purpose of that committee?
They could appeal to the committee for further clarification.
Who made the decision?
In what respect?
So if they were suggesting that NRA assessed their property and they wanted to challenge that, they suggested potentially that they wanted to receive more entitlements, they could then approach the Healthy Floodplains Review Committee and get a review of that. So who made the decision in that situation?
What decision?
So that committee adjudicated the differences between NRA and the individual property owner. It was the committee who did that. So who made the decision?
Who on the committee? But what particular case? Sorry.
So are you not aware of what the Healthy Floodplains Review Committee did and what they were tasked to do?
Yes, you have explained, but it sounds like you're talking about a particular case.
No, I'm not. I'm not talking about a particular case. This is the entire function of this committee, according to the transcript of one of the members that indeed spoke to the Healthy Floodplains Review Committee, and this is public. That basically the purpose of the committee, it was nothing to do with the health of floodplains. It is giving retrospective approval to structures and works while granting new floodplain harvesting entitlements that are far too large. Are you aware that that was the role of the committee?
No, the role of the committee is to ensure procedural fairness for landholders seeking to participate in the rollout of floodplain harvesting access licences and works approvals. It's another process in place to give procedural fairness to participants about work on their property.
So let me get this straight. We have NRA and departmental staff who have the expertise who go out and do on-ground assessment in the valleys like Whydah Valley, border rivers. They make an assessment. Then landholders are told they can appeal to a 4-person committee with representatives of the irrigation industry, the farmers, the environmentalists and an independent chair. They can appeal to that committee and have NRA's decision completely overturned.
It's about procedural fairness.
Procedural fairness. Who makes the decision though?
The committee.
This committee makes the decision. So what we've also heard is that in most of the situations there was no allocation, no decrease in allocation. So we're talking hundreds of appeals. You know that, don't you, Minister? Not one or two cases. Are you aware of this?
I'm aware of a process in place to give procedural fairness with an independent committee with oversight. This is a very...
Wouldn't you think NRA's more independent than this 4-member committee?
I think what we are doing is giving
who have signed confidentiality agreements. Are you aware they've signed confidentiality agreements?
I can confirm they have now.
They have?
Yes.
So are you aware, therefore, that the purpose... So what we have here, I'll just read out some of it. So basically, the task of the committee was to adjudicate the differences between what NRA has said is on farm and what these landholders suggest. That's the task of the committee. Do you think that's fair for a 4-member committee with representatives of irrigators, farmers, plus a chair who I understand has interests in irrigators, plus a representative of the NCC to adjudicate the differences? How are they skilled to do this? And by the way, what they are doing is giving retrospect approval to flood works that may be decommissioned, that will be compensable. What kind of a committee is this? It's secretive. You seem to almost not know what they're doing. So it's kind of been revealed that this is in fact what's going on. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. They could be making decisions that will cost your government hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and you don't know what's going on in that committee?
Kate, I hear your passion and your statements and your ferocity of wanting it all changed, but this is a process that is in place to give procedural fairness to all participants.
How is it procedural fairness?
Well, because it is. Just because you say it isn't doesn't mean it isn't.
Hang on, so the works aren't approved by NRA, right? Let's get this straight. They may need to be modified or decommissioned. You've got this little group of people kind of approving this based on landholders who I understand can come back quite a few times and say, and want their allocation increased and want it increased. Why are they wanting that? Because you're issuing compensable water licences. So this group, I understand, can agree to this, and if there's any discrepancies or if there's any, let's see, if one of the members have an issue, they send you a dissenting report, Dr. Bentley. Do those reports go to the Minister?
No.
So how much does the Minister know about this committee
I
and
just
what
point out
the work
that there
it
have been
undertakes?
2 probity reviews of the Floodplains Review Committee work, 2 probity reviews by independent assessors, lawyers, the first in early 2019 and the second in October 21. In both reviews, it was found that the department's licensing processes were lawful and well documented. Procedural fairness was afforded to applicants. Now, if you have information that is other than that, please let us know, because all I'm hearing from you is suggestions and allegations without facts. But I'll refer back now to Dr. Bentley, who has oversight.
Just quickly, the role of this review committee was in the policy that was published in 2013. This isn't something that we secretly slipped under the table. This is something in the published policy, and they don't rule on what the policy should be. It's just a place that people can apply to if they say, I want someone else independent.
A lot of people are applying, aren't they?
Yes, and very few get referred to me because the committee actually agree on the case. So if you want us to, we can provide those numbers on notice. But most of them are settled by the committee. Formally speaking, it's the department, me, that finally approves those things. But a small number do come to me for resolution because the committee couldn't agree.
I'd take a closer look if I were you, Minister.
Okay, that concludes opposition and crossbench time. I'm now looking to Mr. Martin.
If they do, they're in trouble.
He's got his...
Friday afternoon.
Well, Minister, I saw you passing my notes, so I assumed that was some Dorothy Dix's.
Peter's got a folder full. Look at him.
If there are no questions from the government...
well, Minister, I'd like to ask you if there's anything that's been raised this afternoon that you'd like to clarify.
No.
There you go. That's us done.
Well, very efficient.
And thank you to my team. And that was very nice of Mr. Mookie to acknowledge the work all the officials did during COVID and the difficulties and the opportunities we've now got to see in this is pretty lounge room. But this is, I want to thank them all too. I'm blessed to work with a great bunch of public servants. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Minister. That concludes today's hearing. You did take some questions, I noticed, so the Committee Secretariat will be in touch and you'll have 21 days to respond. I will ask just the committee stay behind for 1 minute to discuss the documents from Mr. Field.
1 minute.